look at a thermal image of a city and then compare that to a map of vegetation, you'll find that where there's greenery, the temperature is lower. That's because things like asphalt, concrete, and shingled roofs absorb more heat from the sun than trees. This is the urban heat island effect, and it accounts for higher temperatures in cities, often by several degrees compared with their surroundings. It's becoming a huge risk to human health as growing urban populations exacerbate the heating effects of climate change. Heat waves kill more people than any other extreme weather event, more than tornadoes, hurricanes, and even floods. That's why urban heat island mitigation strategies are being studied in Singapore by a group of researchers. The government-backed project called Cooling Singapore is now in the process of combining everything they've learned to create a digital tool that can help cities all over the world, starting with Singapore. In Singapore, close to the equator, temperatures regularly rise above 32 degrees Celsius or 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And the city structures only make it worse.
And that is also the case for Singapore, which is basically a concrete jungle, more urbanized, more developed city. And even in Singapore, what you have is a situation whereby there's a temperature difference of 7 degrees Celsius between the more urbanized and the more rural areas.
The government has taken drastic steps to keep temperatures down. This is Gardens by the Bay, an award-winning park, and inside this greenhouse is a pleasant 24 degrees. That's because the dome, along with 24 nearby towers full of thousands of people, is chilled by what's probably the world's largest underground district cooling system. It uses a large central plant that cools water and then pipes it into banks, residential towers, an exhibition centre, shopping malls, and the city's iconic Marina Bay Sands hotel and casino complex.
So one of the biggest perks of using this system for the buildings is that they can save 40% in terms of electricity usage compared to your traditional air conditioners.
And with Singapore relying on natural gas for most of its power, this new system means emission savings equivalent to removing 10,000 cars from the city's roads. That has big implications for the rest of the world. If things stay as they are, more than a third of the world's electricity could end up being used to cool buildings and vehicles by 2050.
As the world gets hotter, gets warmer, there is a greater need for air conditioning and as well as refrigerators, for instance. And the more people are buying these household appliances, the more energy usage they use, and they release heat more, and that then exacerbates climate change.
It's a vicious circle. And so since 2017, researchers at Cooling Singapore have been identifying design solutions that reduce our need for so much cool air in the first place.
One thing many cities have in common, and that's the importance of vegetation. That's a very important measure to mitigate the urban heat because of the shading effect, of course, and the psychological effects of the vegetation, and also because of the possible evaporative cooling effect of the vegetation. Vegetation can be, of course, on the ground floor in form of trees and shrubs, and you can walk under them. This is the so-called canopy layer that the vegetation forms above us. But vegetation can also go up the facades of buildings, and it can go to the roof of the buildings.
Luckily, Singapore has been striving for the garden city feel for quite some time. It was a vision initially introduced by then Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew in 1967 to make life more pleasant for people. And today, Singapore is one of the world's greenest cities in terms of urban vegetation. Kampung Admiralty, a community centre that contains health facilities and social spaces, now provides more green space than the plot of land it was originally built on. It's topped by a roofscape of staggered terraces covered in local plants, which functions as a community park, and a village green in the centre that contains farm plots for residents to tend to. Park Royal on Pickering was designed as a hotel in a garden that doubled the green growing potential of its site. There's now 15,000 metres of sky gardens, reflecting pools, waterfalls, planter terraces and green walls. And the government has big plans as well.
Singapore actually has a plan to plant 1 million trees and add more green spaces over the next 10 years. It is actually a mix of wanting to reduce the urban heat island effect, but on the other hand is also to get the people to be more connected to nature.
But it's not enough. The city-state has still been warming twice as quickly as the world average over the past 6 decades. That's why Cooling Singapore has developed a catalogue of other potential heat mitigation measures.
When you try to mitigate the urban heat island effect in a city or in any building, in a village as well, the first place to start is by shading of the windows. You have to keep areas clear so that the wind can move through it. Water of a certain depth can act as a very good thermal buffer. If you have to construct heavy buildings such as high-rises, at least you can make the surface, the facade, less heavy, and you can protect it from direct sun penetration. We have to make sure that no combustion engines will be in the city in the middle, in the medium to long-term range. So ideally, the electricity production is outside of the city, and you bring just the clean electricity into the city. You can at least minimize the use of energy in the city, and you can start to slowly convert the roofs, the facades of the city into production areas for renewable energy. In Singapore, unfortunately, this is a limited option, but in the long run, it could produce up to 20-25% of the energy, of the electricity needed in Singapore if all the roofs and the areas in the buildings, on the facades would be used to do that.
With so many different ideas, Cooling Singapore is also designing a virtual model of the city to test them out. It's called a Digital Urban Climate Twin, or DUCT, that will calculate how each element of the city's design will impact the urban heat island effect.
That means we model not only the geometry of the buildings digitally, but also we model the transportation, the insulation, the temperature, the radiation coming from the sun, the weather, the local climate, the even very, very microclimate of the city, the water, the movement of people in the city. We can invent scenarios, we can design scenarios, test them before we actually build them, and if they test very well and we are sure that they will function, then we can start to build them and put them into reality.
Singapore will be using this new tool to figure out which actions it should take next. And the model can be applied to any city, whether it needs to keep heat out or keep heat in, which will ultimately save energy, slow climate change, and improve our quality of life.
So this is something that Singapore will be able to export, maybe even together with its city development systems that it already has. Singapore is one of the very few cities in the world that really combine this scientific approach with a very well-established urban redesign and urban design approach. Through its agencies and the combination of its agencies, it has achieved a lot in the past. If it keeps following the scientific path and the combination with the other knowledge in the city already, we think that it will be a very comfortable and very livable city in the future, even more than today.
Times are tough. Jobs are scarce. It's risky to be outside and around others. Seems like there's very few ways to make extra money during a pandemic. So I guess I'll just hunker down and binge social media until this all blows over. Wait, don't these people make money? How do these people make money? Streamers, YouTubers, Twitch stars. How do they make money? Is it a lot? Is it a lot of work? I know, I gotta ask somebody in the biz, and I got just the guy. Austin John Plays.
This is your full-time job now, right?
As of November of last year, yes. This was always just kind of like a side thing. Like any money that I made from doing my videos and whatever else, I never touched that because I didn't really think of that as being like real money. And then it started coming in more and more. And then it was like I hit my first day that I broke $1,000 and I was like, this is actually going to be money.
How did the YouTube channel come to be?
When the game Pokemon Sun and Moon came out for the 3DS, there was like things that I learned about the game, and then I wanted to just share that information with people. And at the time, I didn't have any way to capture a screen or anything, so I found like generic footage, and I kind of put it all together with so much editing. And that video got 6 views. And then 2 days later, I made another one, and that one got 12 views. And then I just started pumping out more and more content, and people were like, this guy knows what he's talking about. It really just started building on top of itself, and then it was like, my channel really focuses on tips and tricks. So I play a straight 18 hours, and I'll finish the game or get to about the 40-hour mark, and then I'll make my first video. While I'm going through, I have a giant notepad and just scribbles everywhere, and I make these notes of like the things that stumped me, so I know the things that may stump other people.
What do you need to think about if you're building your YouTube channel?
1, you need to do something that you're passionate about. Not that you like, not that you think you're gonna make money on, something you're passionate about. The other thing is something that other people are passionate about. It holds a special place to them. And third is, it needs to be something that people are gonna seek out information on. In order to enter into the marketplace, you either need to be better than everyone else, you either need to be faster than everyone else, or you need to be more accessible than everyone else. And you can't be more accessible because it's already on the platform. Granted, if you understand how the algorithm works, which is very similar to Google Analytics, then yeah, you can have a little bit of a head start. But if you're not doing it faster, and if you're not doing it better than everyone else, then why should anyone watch your channel? So my income as a YouTuber kind of breaks down to 3 different ways. 1, which is the bulk of it, which is ad revenue. Whenever you go and you watch a video and then there's an ad and then you wait 5 seconds and you hit the bottom right corner and then you go on to the next video, or a non-skippable ad, or the video starts immediately, you get the little banner ad at the bottom, or if you scroll down from the video, the first thing that shows there is an ad. Those are the 4 different types of ads that can appear on every single YouTube video. And all of them pay a certain amount. It varies on lots of things, like the country of the person who posts it, the country of the person who watches it, the time of year, where you are in the quarter, if there's anything going on with a reduction in ad revenue. Like, great example, COVID-19, companies weren't spending as much on advertising. So because of that, CPM went down. CPM stands for click per thousand. I'm using the Roman numeral for 1,000. And that means that for every 1,000 views, you get a certain amount of money. Now, on low ads, when I first started off, my CPM was 30 cents. So every 1,000 views, I made 30 cents. But then once I signed with an MCN and I started making more quality content and more engaging content, some of my better videos and certain times of the year, I can see CPMs as high as $12 to $14. And there's a big fluctuation between, you know, if I post a video when there's no ads being spent like January and February, that's the reason a lot of your favorite YouTubers and also TV shows don't post new videos in that time of year because ad rates are down. Why are they going to make content then? Instead, you're recording and you're bulking up for when ad revenue is higher. The second way that a YouTuber makes income is support, crowdfunding, things like that. When I first started off, Patreon was really the only option, but then they started rolling out supporters and members for YouTube channels. So whenever I have a live stream, you can click a button and then you can become a member, and then you get special icons next to your name. I believe they're called badges, or on any video, you can hit the join button, and that helps support the channel. And then the third aspect of that would be merch. And for me, my merch has been somewhat basic. In fact, I'm wearing one of my t-shirts from last year right now. You have to endure the times that your first video gets 6 views, that you posted on Reddit and they say, shut up, and then an auto mod bans you. You have to go through that, because until you go through that and you discover why you're doing it, you're not doing it for other people, you're doing it for yourself. If you're not loving what you do, then it's not worth it.
Huh. So make a channel about something that I'm passionate about. Oh, sweet. I guess I can make the channel about that. Now, how do I grow an audience? How do I get popular?
It's all about diversification, right? You have to have a massive Twitter following. You have to have a massive Instagram following. You have to have a massive YouTube following. Of course, you have to be on Twitch, which is the key platform. But basically, any way you can get in front of your audience, you can engage with your audience, is going to drive those clicks, which ultimately drives the advertiser revenue that you get back from all of these platforms.
It's me and Dan playing video games and talking in a funny manner over them.
They're not just people who are good at games, they're actually people who are good at online engagement, online entertainment, first and foremost.
You have the right to remain stylish. Anything you wear can and will be used against you in the court of fashion.
The streamer is either very, very talented at the game. The best player in the game is generally going to draw a crowd because people like watching people who are very good. On the other hand, they're either very, very good or funny, charismatic, whatever it is on that side.
Oh, no.
You know, it becomes more of a show where they talk about other things outside of the gaming world, and gaming becomes really just a backdrop and an excuse to engage with that audience.
There were those weird, like, Ronald McDonald, like, straight to VHS movies. You remember those?
I'm personable, I'm chatty. I would kind of, when boring things were happening in the game, I would ramble on about, movies I'd watched or books I'd read and, or conversations I'd had and stuff like that. And so I think being personable was a big part of that.
It's not just getting on and playing games. It's getting on and being an entertainer. You are putting on a show.
All right, now let me go ahead and grab the samurai sword that every gym has. Okay, he's dead.
To have a larger audience and to have that audience, I think, stay with you, you have to bring something extra. You have to find your niche. You have to find what works and what connects with the audience and what makes them laugh and what makes them keep coming back.
You got to make it a little more exciting, all right? Throw in a hanging bishop. Have everybody in suspense for a moment.
I think the real most important thing is to just get used to being on camera. Like in any sort of performance thing, is get used to talking on camera. My first few videos were terrible, but because I sat down and did it for 6 to 8 hours a day, I just got used to talking and I got over that uncomfortable hump.
If you go into Twitch purely with the expectation that you're going to make money, make a job out of it, have all this growth, and it's going to be great, you're probably going to burn out prior to getting to that point because there's very little payoff for a long time, right? Like multiple years generally before you really start to see a payoff. And so, those first few times you're streaming, nobody is there. One person shows up every 30 minutes, says hi, maybe, and leaves, right? Like, it's very discouraging, I think, for a lot of people. And so you have to be there just loving it. You have to love talking to yourself when nobody is around. You have to love just the game that you're playing, all of that stuff, because it takes a while, and I think a majority of people burn out prior to getting to the like profitable point of it.
And there you have it. My very own YouTube, Twitch, Discord, and streaming channels all ready to go live. It's a veritable social media ecosystem just on the verge of thriving. So, don't forget to smash like and subscribe, and visit my Patreon for perks. Also, go to my merch page. And one last thing, stay cool, my friends.
This is live stream shopping, one of the hottest trends in China. Every night, tens of millions of people watch live shows hosted by influencers like Via and buy the products they recommend. On e-commerce and social apps like Taobao and Douyin, the sister app of TikTok.
我觉得已经改变了大家的购物的方式。其实各种各样的产品，哪怕你不买，你也可以来看。当然，你看了，你就有可能会买。
It's not about, only shopping. It's about the experience. It's about having fun. You got to see 3D. You got to see in some kind of action. It's almost like a theater act.
The internet craze has taken over China. By the end of 2020, the country had almost 400 million live stream shopping users. China's live stream e-commerce market has also grown dramatically, with an estimated value of $161 billion in 2020. It's becoming popular outside China as well. So, is live streaming the future of shopping? Live streaming is not a new thing. In China, it started in 2015 with the rollout of 4G. And it was first used for entertainment and socializing. Many live streamers performed for their followers or chatted to them, making money by receiving virtual currency and gifts. In the West, live streaming is mainly the domain of avid gamers. In China, it's broken into e-commerce.
China actually has a very big e-commerce empire, so it uses these super apps, what we call that you have payment, you have search of information, you have recommendation system, and you have huge amount of goods available on the platform, and as well as a lot of consumers. So with this advantage, they merge these features of live streaming to make the influencers actually sell goods.
Here is a perfect choice: nice neutrals, beautiful print, nothing overwhelming, and the warmth and comfort of flannel. This is item.
Traditional TV shopping involves a one-way direction, whereby a host introduces a product, demonstrates certain things, and say, call this number or something. But live stream shopping is live. That in itself is a very, very big difference. It causes different psychology. And live stream shopping is a very entertaining way of actually engaging someone else.
When you shop, actually, this live streaming video will continue. It will minimize into a corner, and you can buy the items and pay all on the same app. And after that, the live streaming screen will just enlarge by itself, and the promoter will come back to screen. So it's very convenient.
Taobao, one of China's biggest e-commerce platforms owned by tech giant Alibaba, added a live streaming function in early 2016. In the following years, other e-commerce and social platforms like JD and Douyin also integrated this feature.
开头的时候还是有很多的挑战的，对画面的这个流畅，然后是否能够很真实的去还原商品，它其实在这个上面是有很高的这个门槛跟技术的这个卡口在的。
不管是我们的这个用户的接受度，还是商家的这个上手的这个难度都很高。但是这几年下来，基本上难点在不断被突破的。
Over $70 billion worth of goods was sold via live stream on Taobao in the year through March 2021. Latest surveys show that over 60% of live stream users in China were watching shopping shows, and over 65% of them shopped at least once via live stream. In 2020, live stream shopping got a huge boost during the pandemic, when millions of people were in lockdown and many retailers were pushed online.
People, during the lockdown, felt like there's a need for more social interactions. This live platform creates an interesting kind of environment that gives people the sense that I'm actually interacting with you. And then live stream shopping brings in a lot more variety of things that people could buy and satisfy, the sense of like losing control, especially during the pandemic.
At the heart of this craze are the top influencers who have tens of millions of followers and sell products worth millions of dollars every night. They often use their star power to get bargains from retailers, which in turn boosts their own sales and influence.
So if you think about China's live streaming, you have to know the king and queen of the influencers. The queen of live streaming, Via, she is actually having the biggest viewership and the biggest sales volume for a long time on Taobao platform. She can sell everything from like Gucci sunglasses, lipsticks, homes, and cars. One time she offered her followers to go on a Tesla ride with her, and she even, for once, sold a rocket launch in her live streaming room for 40 million yuan. The king will be Li Jiaqi, more widely known as Lipstick's brother. He used to be a cosmetic sales before he turned into live streaming e-commerce, and he knows a lot about the cosmetics. So he's the one that will actually put the lipsticks on himself when he's on the show.
Top live streamers like Via and Li Jiaqi have become celebrities in China and can earn millions of dollars a year. Although not everyone can be as popular, mid-ranking live streamers like Tiffany still earn a good income through sales commissions.
如果说单从收入方面来讲的话，那主播的收入是比普通的工作要高很多。但是呢，主播这个工作时刻对身体，包括对精神都有很大的一个考验的。就是每天需要集中精力，然后长达5-6个小时，这种状态是很累的。而且这5-6个小时的话，你是脑子是不停的，然后嘴巴是不停的，然后手也是不停的，眼睛也是不停的。像我们做主播，不是说单一的只做直播一件事情，然后还会有选品的一些工作，然后还会有一些其他的事情排在里面，其实是没有个人生活的。那我觉得增强粉丝影响力的话，不是说某一件事情。可能今天做了什么事情你就增大了影响力，而是每天不断的内容的输出，粉丝不断的可能对你的了解，慢慢的信任你。
有芝麻酱的味道，如果吃不习惯的话就慎买。
A lot of successful live streamers are generally very good at communication. They're very good at articulating very simply what a product does, what a product doesn't do. In order for them to sell, they need to be trustworthy and appear trustworthy, and they need to, show in some ways that they're authentic, right? So for Via and Li Jiaqi, they are able to articulate that quite a bit through their body language, through what they say. For example, Li Jiaqi will also sometimes say bad things about certain products because to him that's his honest opinion, and sometimes people want to hear that. And so they seem very credible, they seem very trustworthy, and don't forget, they're also very entertaining and very interesting. If you're familiar with Li Jiaqi, he won a Guinness record for like the most lipstick applications to models in like 30 seconds. So if you're able to create a lot of buzz with interesting things that you do, people who may not want to buy lipsticks will also stream in just to watch what he does. And then from there, you might get hooked.
这就是一般女生出门的时候涂的口红的颜色。
Live streamers also use sales techniques such as limited time or supply. This sense of scarcity can often encourage viewers to buy.
The platform in itself creates and enhances some of these things because you see it live. Something we call social proof has taken over, meaning that, hey, other people are interested, other people are joining in, other people want the same product. and they add it in the chat and they ask questions and they say, oh, I want this too. What happens then? It makes the whole product even more scarce.
But it's not just influencers. Local farmers, luxury brands, even mutual funds have also started their own live stream shows.
Working with very top tier live streamers can be risky. It's not necessary that the benefits will end up with the brand. So we see company executives opening their own shows. And we see like P&G have their own sales room, which runs shows every day as well. We also have like local governors in like small towns to sell their agricultural products. So the live streaming is definitely transformed the way product owners can think about how to reach their consumers, and it enables a lot of players to actually sell.
Live stream shopping is going global. Merchants in Southeast Asia have embraced this trend. And in the West, Amazon has upgraded its live streaming function, adding interactive features like chat rooms. Companies, including Google and Facebook, are also developing and investing in technologies to integrate video and e-commerce.
直播电商它其实已经开始成为主流，它未来的发展空间跟潜力都是巨大的。
接下来大家会越来越依赖这种购物方式，会变成一个比较日常化、比较规范化的这么一个趋势。
If you look at the numbers alone, their numbers alone, Li Jiaxi's numbers or Via's numbers, you know that they can sell and you know that they can generate revenue. Are they able to sustain it over a long period of time? It depends on how innovative they are at changing some of the things that they do.
But you can't expect consumers one day turn into virtual shopping for good. There will be the nature of us that crave to go into the store, to touch the goods and actually wear it and see how it looks like and walk around in that with our friends. And those things wouldn't be replaceable with live streaming.
You could imagine that the oceans are actually the largest battery. We're storing huge amounts of energy in the oceans. The wave motion can be very deep. It can extend down several hundred meters. And once it gets to the near shore, from about 50 meters, the whole water column is moving backwards and forwards.
As we search for ways to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, some are looking to a largely untapped potential source of renewable energy. In theory, waves off the coast of the United States alone could generate over 2 trillion kilowatt hours of electricity a year, enough to power more than half of the country.
Waves intensify and subside not as quickly as the wind, and that means that it can produce a smoother power generation curve. One of the potential advantages of wave energy is that it could act as a complementary source of power compared to other renewables on the grid if it were to be scaled up to commercial scale.
For decades, engineers have been trying to convert wave energy into electricity, but a host of technological and financial challenges have complicated their efforts.
In the years from around 2006 to 2015, there were a spate of bankruptcies in the sector, and this was largely because of a lack of kind of continuous proven projects out at sea with reliable electricity generation.
Since then, companies have been trying to develop the technologies at a steadier pace and with a smaller cash burn. But the same questions remain. Can companies develop devices and technologies that actually work? Is wave energy just a novelty or something that can become a major renewable energy source?
The sea is a very challenging environment within which to operate a power project. So seawater is corrosive and conditions are very rough. So this means that power projects don't have a very long lifetime, and it increases operating and maintenance costs.
Partly because of that, many early wave energy projects hit rough waters, such as the Palamas Wave Energy Converter in Portugal and the Isla Limpet project in Scotland. But that hasn't stopped others from trying.
Companies are focused on testing projects out at sea, proving their durability, trying to raise capital and bring down cost. The sector hasn't really converged around one single technology design, and companies are kind of undecided about which design works best.
Finland-based AW Energy is a veteran in the sector. The first proof of concept of the company's device was made in the 90s after diver Rauno Koivusaari observed the strong back-and-forth movement of a hatch cover in a shipwreck in the Baltic Sea.
The waves are generated far from the coastline, so the wind blows on the surface of the water, causing the water particles to rotate, and that rotation extends deep down below the surface, and the waves can be very long. They can be several hundred meters long. And as they come into the near shore, this rotational energy turns into an elliptical energy, and eventually backwards and forwards, as you probably noticed if you've been swimming on the seashore in large waves, you're pulled in and out. That's the energy that we're extracting. There's a sweet spot where we deploy, so around 10 to 15 meters of water depth. That's where there's still strong wave energy coming in.
After years of research, prototyping and testing, the company has deployed Wave Roller, a 350 kilowatt device in the waters of Portugal. Wave Roller has an 18-meter wide and 10-meter high steel panel fixed to the seabed via a floatable foundation. The panel moves back and forth with the waves, capturing the energy.
It's submerged in the depth of 15 meters, so it's protected from the extreme waves. We generate electricity by capturing the movement with hydraulic circuitry in a machine room underneath the surface. That hydraulic energy we turn to electricity with hydraulic accumulators and hydraulic motors, and also a generator.
The Wave Roller has survived large waves at sea for over a year and delivered electricity via an underwater cable to the grid in Portugal. Meanwhile, the company has won a €2.5 million grant to work on an upgraded version of the Wave Roller, aiming to increase the electricity generation capacity to 1 megawatt. The upscaled device would have a bigger panel, 2 power takeoff units, and improved software to control the energy production.
We have taken into use a wave prediction algorithm that kind of tells us what kind of waves are coming in to our device. That gives us few seconds to prepare for capturing more energy, and the difference in that is significant.
Our future plans are to deliver technology around the world. So I'm hoping we can be working on delivering technology to projects in Asia and also in the American continent as well.
Meanwhile, Israeli company Eco Wave Power is taking a different approach to capturing the power of the ocean. For the company's founder, Ina Braverman, developing new sources of renewable energy is a personal mission.
I was born in Ukraine in 1986, and 2 weeks after I was born, the Chernobyl nuclear reactor exploded, causing the largest in history nuclear disaster. I was one of the babies that got hurt from the negative effects of such explosion. I had a respiratory arrest and a clinical death. Luckily, my mother, a nurse, approached my crib on time and gave me a mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, which saved my life. I got a second chance in life and decided to do something good with it.
Growing up, Ina wanted to be a politician to positively change the world. After working as a translator at a renewable energy company, she decided to change paths.
Solar and wind energy were fully commercialized, there were a lot of amazing technologies implemented everywhere, I saw that wave energy, although it's an immense source of electricity, the biggest companies in the world are trying to develop wave energy with no success. And there was kind of a race going on in the world of who is the company that is going to develop a viable wave energy solution first.
In 2011, the then 24-year-old Inna co-founded EcoWave Power. Instead of installing devices offshore, the company's devices are attached to existing breakwaters, jetties, and piers.
Our technology is very cost efficient, especially in comparison to the offshore technologies, because we don't need any ships, divers, underwater mooring or cables. We install on existing man-made structures, and all our expensive equipment, the generator, the hydraulic conversion unit, the automation, is located on land just like a regular power station.
This is the EcoWave Power conversion unit that has been operating in Jaffa Port since 2014 until 2020. Here you can see how the technology works. Basically, the floaters are going up and down and pushing the hydro cylinders, which transmit biodegradable fluid into land-located accumulators. A pressure is being built. The higher the waves, the higher the pressure, which is used to turn the hydro motor, which is turning the generators. The whole system is controlled by a smart automation system, which you can see right here. And in case of upcoming storms, the system automatically raises the floater above the water level and keeps them in the upward position until the storm passes.
The company has been operating a 100-kilowatt grid-connected device in Gibraltar since 2016, which is enough to power 100 households. Currently, Inna and her team are working on another 100-kilowatt project at the port of Jaffa in Tel Aviv.
The project will be also the first time in the history of Israel that wave energy will officially connect to the electrical grid. And our goal going forward is to expand it to all suitable breakwaters in the city of Tel Aviv and to supply a significant part of the city's electricity needs.
Today, engineers and entrepreneurs are still trying to crack wave energy. Globally, only a few hundred kilowatts of wave energy are deployed, compared with gigawatts of offshore wind. But the field has come a long way in recent years, and with the right engineering solutions, this new power source could eventually become competitive with more mature renewables like solar and wind.
I would have a lot more confidence in the success of wave energy companies today as opposed to like 20 years ago. But in the next few years, or maybe the next couple of decades, it will be more likely to be used in remote locations like islands that are otherwise dependent on expensive diesel power, or out at sea on gas decommissioning rigs, or for powering underwater autonomous vehicles.
So definitely, wave energy can compete with other renewable energy sources, but I personally believe that this is not a competition. In order to have a 100% renewable energy friendly world, we need all renewable energy sources to work together.
Who are all these people from? Who are all these people from?
So can you please tell me? I'm not going to... please wait.
You know, I've covered a lot of companies. I've covered a lot of Machiavellian companies where, you know, people play rough. I don't think I've ever seen anything on the scale of Nissan.
He is making you, but you act for Nissan. I mean, it's corrupt. The system is...
One of the most dramatic elements was Ravinder Pasi's home being raided by court officials in Yokohama.
You scared my wife. You scared my children. I worked in Nissan for 16 years.
So Rav Pasi's journey into the darkest recesses of the Japanese corporate world started when he was the general counsel, the highest corporate lawyer position in the company.
In the past few minutes, Nissan has revealed that its chairman has been arrested after allegations of serious misconduct.
He was tasked with investigating Carlos Ghosn. And he was told, conduct an internal investigation and get to the heart of the matter. And then along the way, he started to notice serious conflicts of interest.
He is one of the few people who knows an extreme amount of detail regarding the alleged crimes by Carlos Ghosn. And he's now ready to tell his own story on the record about some of the events that happened.
My name is Ravinder Pasi. I'm the former Global General Counsel of Nissan Motor Co. Limited. And you could say, yes, I had a front row seat in terms of what was going on.
When Carlos Ghosn saved Nissan years ago, he was depicted in Japanese comic books as this hero, and now maybe we'll see comic books where he's the villain.
In corporate Japan, Nissan was quite an unusual company. It was led for 2 decades by a non-Japanese executive.
Well, Carlos Ghosn was a hero in the Japanese business world. If you had a global business celebrity in Japan and worldwide, it was definitely Carlos Ghosn.
In a country with few foreigners at the top, he stood out. But over the years, he saved Nissan from bankruptcy, allied with Renault and Mitsubishi, and turned the alliance into one of the most competitive in the world.
Yet as the years went on, you know, I think his ambitions changed a little bit. He started thinking about legacy plays, and one of them was to really tighten the alliance between Renault and Japan. And unbeknownst to him, there was a contingent of senior Nissan executives that were really felt threatened by that move. They really thought that they would lose complete control of the car company, and even in the government, there was probably a little bit of anxiety about a national champion in the auto industry falling under full-blown foreign control.
Carlos Ghosn was an auto industry leader, respected by many in Japan. Now he's in jail.
The arrest of Carlos Ghosn came completely out of the blue. This was in November of 2018. He was coming to Japan on Nissan's corporate jet for a regular executive meeting, and he was met on the tarmac by Japanese authorities who whisked him away to jail and charged him with financial misconduct crimes.
So what happened was that a power struggle ensued inside the company, and somewhere along the way, it was criminalized. By that I mean that there were allegations leveled at Carlos Ghosn about the way he reported his pay to Japanese authorities, the way he handled money inside the company, that in other contexts might have been a board action, might have been handled internally. A number of executives at Nissan decided to take this difference and take it over to the Tokyo prosecutor's office, and that unleashed a chain of events that would shake the entire auto industry.
So after Carlos Ghosn was arrested, Nissan launched an internal investigation into the events that led up to his arrest.
So Rav Passi was tasked with investigating Carlos Ghosn, and he was told, get to the heart of the matter, find out what Carlos Ghosn did wrong and bring it to our shareholders.
It's really complicated because you had various things coming out of the weeds. 2018, the investigation has started, and we become aware of matters in terms of conflicts, actions by certain individuals that cause some concern because things might not quite be what they seem.
So in our story, we really took a close look at Harinada and his role in Carlos Ghosn's downfall.
Harinada is one of the most fascinating figures inside Nissan. He's also a lawyer. He's originally Malaysian. Hello, Mr. Hadi. And he had a meteoric rise through the company and became very, very close to Carlos Ghosn and other top figures. He had a front row seat at all the major strategic deliberations at the company. And when he discovered that Carlos Ghosn, as his final legacy play, was going to tighten the relationship between Renault and Nissan, he made a decision to go against Carlos Ghosn. And he became one of the key figures that decided that Carlos Ghosn had to go.
Harinada was somebody who actually recruited me into the company, so I have a long-standing relationship with him, or did have a long-standing relationship with him. For many, many years, he was a mentor. I had doubts about the credibility of the process right at the start. Harinada had a plea deal with the Tokyo prosecutors. Now, that suggests he was intrinsically involved in some of the wrongdoing, or the allegations of wrongdoing, and it just didn't smell right, just doesn't sit right.
So there was a basic conflict of interest. In other words, Harinada had to deliver results to Japanese prosecutors to avoid his own criminal liability, and he's accusing and leading the investigation of Carlos Ghosn.
Some of the people who had been involved in the original alleged crimes were also looking into the affairs themselves. Ravinder Passi began pointing out some of these conflict of interest issues. And the reason for that is essentially his concern was for the company. If the company's own investigation into itself was compromised, that could lead to a very weak position in various lawsuits that it was dealing with across the world.
I had discussions with Harry, discussions with the statutory auditors about these conflicts, discussions with HR about some of these conflicts, because at that point, we reported into him. You know, at the time, everything was quite, as you can imagine, it was, we've got to do this, we've got to do that, we've got to move fast. But when you step back and look at some of these things, you just think, my God, what was going on here? Because me, members of my team, were being placed in immediate danger. Your chairman's been arrested, a representative director's been arrested. They both happen to be foreigners. And then now what we need to do, we're being instructed to do, is certain compliance professionals need to go into properties in Brazil, for example, and retrieve evidence. They've got to do it very carefully, because if they don't do it carefully, they're going to get convicted of criminal activities. And likewise, when a team of lawyers were commissioned to go to Lebanon. I mean, one of my immediate concerns was, why are lawyers from Nissan being sent to go to Lebanon to retrieve evidence? These are just lawyers, they're corporate lawyers from Nissan. You had revelations that a number of executives had benefited from share appreciation rights when they shouldn't have. I mean, you know, substantive amounts of money being taken by these guys when they weren't entitled to take them. And you do think, yes, how is this going to look later on? It's going to look quite concerning. So that triggered for me the sort of assessment that, well, I'm going to have to do something, because up until this point, I haven't put down on paper these conflicts and these issues.
So Rav Pasi makes a fateful move. He writes this letter to the board listing every suspicion he has in great detail, backed up by evidence, backed up by memos, of why this internal investigation had serious problems. He sends the letter to the board and it's crickets. He doesn't hear much of anything.
Nothing happened thereafter. Nothing at all. Just like it just gone into a black box.
And he began to suspect that there was a desire, even at the highest level within Nissan, to kind of sweep these conflicts of interest under the rug.
Unfortunately for me, I think, you know, again, with hindsight, people must have thought that this is the nail that's sticking out, and we can't have this. Within 3 days of me submitting that to the board of directors, that letter to the independent board of directors, I was removed from the Goan Executive Conduct Matters. I was then told that I could not attend board meetings anymore. And up until that point, I had attended every single board meeting. I was then also told that after 8 years of being in Japan, I'd be going back to the UK. It eventually transpired that I'd be the VP of Projects and Transformation, managing a team of 3. So you can imagine what this feels like at this stage. Almost an arbitrary removal from Japan, where I've lived for 8 years, had 3 children there, my family has grown up, and we've been settled there, having a few months earlier been promoted to vice president at a global level, to being almost demoted.
So Pasi was essentially being reassigned to get him as far away from the internal investigation as possible, and also to a certain extent in retaliation to some of the issues that he brought up regarding the internal investigation and Harinada.
What happened to Rav Pasi can be seen as a series of corporate humiliations. I mean, first of all, his immediate responsibilities were taken away from him. Eventually, he lost, the coveted general counsel title. But it didn't stop there. Toward the end of his stay in Japan, Rav and his wife were convinced that they were being followed.
During that period, I'd noticed that whilst driving my car, I'd have other cars following me. First time I noticed this was around mid-March, and I was driving, I can't remember where I was going, but this grey van, small van, just literally started following me. And I noticed that there was somebody in the car taking pictures. And lo and behold, we were absolutely being followed either by people on foot or other individuals, 2 or 3, normally 2 burly men in a car, different cars at different times, following us around. They were following the family as well. And, given I'd seen the Nissan security department behave in a very, very egregious manner with others in terms of following and surveilling, I was very concerned as to what they were doing and who they were giving this information to. Because if they're giving this information to the authorities, you do think, why? What's going on here? I mean, this is just not normal behavior.
And this all culminated in a rather dramatic event in the middle of 2020.
Who are you people?
Where Nissan had hired a legal team and had obtained an unusual court order from the district court in Yokohama
to basically do a search of his home and seizure of his corporate laptop and phone and other documents.
If you don't let us in now, we have to break this key.
So it's a pretty extreme way to treat someone who'd spent 16 years at the company.
These people have all come in. We don't really know who they are, apart from the fact that I've been shown a badge that says the Yokohama court. And they're here to recover a laptop and a mobile phone. It was even more weird because I'd highlighted to the directors that certain Nissan executives were trying to recover this laptop and this phone whilst I was still in Japan. And I was very concerned because it had evidence on there that related to misconduct matters and other forms of inappropriate conduct. It was just another form of intimidation, another form of harassment, forcing me almost to leave the company and the country. Because once they'd retained and obtained these items, we were still followed, which, again, I just couldn't understand. What is the point of doing that? You know, this is a car company. This is not the KGB.
I think it's fair to say that Rav Pasi didn't have full battlefield awareness of all the intrigue going on at Nissan. I mean, Hari Nada is interesting because he's both charismatic and charming, and one of the most brutal corporate infighters one could ever run across.
This is a confidential company email, right? You should not have this.
If he had fallen into line, he would probably still have his job at Nissan, be paid very well, and continued his work.
A career that he spent 16 years building at Nissan is irretrievably broken. It's been smashed to smithereens. He and his family paid a huge price, certainly. But in terms of being able to sleep at night, I think, he's come out ahead.
I highlighted issues to the highest levels of the company so that they could be dealt with appropriately by those in charge. There was no response to those, and there was retaliation against me. What's really profound, like absolutely profound, is that none of your colleagues, I mean people who you have known for years, forget it.
Yeah.
You're on your own.
Yeah.
And you got to be ready for that. You've got to be ready for that. If you take it on anyway.
This is the awful truth. There's always someone in the family that's pushing it.
This lady does not deserve to be taken advantage of, especially at your age with your own grandchild.
Yeah.
My grandma is having to sue them. I'm testifying against them. Nobody's talking. They're one floor below right now. I get afraid to go on the elevator. It's sad that it had to devolve to this.
It's like a soap opera to me.
It's a very sad thing.
It's a family feud.
A family feud.
Here's a family that, on paper, you would think has the wealth that so many people seek, yet at the end of the day, it seemed to sort of rip everybody apart. My name's Tom Schoenberg. I'm a senior reporter here at Bloomberg News, cover financial enforcement. I was approached by someone close to the Schottenstein family and asked whether or not I would be interested in writing about Beverly Schottenstein and this case that she had against J.P. Morgan. And it was immediately clear that there was a great story here to be told. So I started just, assembling all sorts of documents that the family made available to me. That included a diary that Beverly had begun writing when she started having suspicions about what was actually going on with her money. Beverly obtained her wealth from the Schottenstein kind of retail empire that has at times included Big Lots, Value City, American Eagle Outfitters, DSW Shoes. Beverly's husband died, and at which point they sold off their portion of the company, bringing them an enormous amount of wealth at around 1990. Estimates of her wealth were around $90 million. She, for many years, had that pool of money being managed by outside advisors. Her grandsons in the late 2000s had both graduated and were becoming financial advisors. She gave them a little bit to work with, and over time, her grandson, Evan, became the trustee of her entire estate. Managing sort of family money is not a conflict. In fact, some ways in wealth management, it's kind of how you get your start. It's kind of the seed that you need to sort of get going in the business. But Beverly started having suspicions that something was wrong probably in around 2016.
Well, there were suspicious things, but taken separately without everyone talking about their own experiences, it was hard to really put it together.
She had written a check to her caretaker, Dawn, that bounced. So she went down to her local Chase branch to sort of find out what was going on. She wasn't getting paper statements in the mail, so she asked them to print out a number of her statements having to do with her checking account and her credit card account.
So we went to the bank and asked for the statements. And she got a whole year and going through all of them, page by page by page.
And it was there she saw all sorts of charges that she said she didn't authorize or didn't know about.
I was becoming very, very suspicious. I was starting to look in the money part, and that's what bothered me more when I saw that money was going. And I was not a big spender.
Around the same time, Dawn, she starts noticing Beverly's son, who lived in the condominium below her, came up with Evan with a shredder and started grabbing papers in her office area, including some with J.P. Morgan letterhead, and just started sitting at the kitchen table, just shredding documents over and over.
Yeah, they came in one morning.
They used to do it in the back.
Through the back door, and they brought the shredder inside. And then they went in the drawers in the office and took out all the papers, and they started doing it. I was very suspicious because I know you don't go around and destroying papers.
Beverly said that they had done this many times before.
That's when she said to me, Dawn, I'm going to write my feelings in this black book.
Diary.
And it's a diary, and she started writing. Each day she would write a little at a time.
Around the holidays of 2018, a package had arrived, a FedEx package, and in it were materials about a venture capital fund based out of the Cayman Islands. Dawn and some other family members take a look at this, and they see that Beverly is signed up for this fund to the tune of $5 million over the course of several years.
And that was really the beginning of it. That was sort of the tip of the iceberg when it became obvious that something was going on, that my grandmother really wasn't aware of this fund.
You know, Beverly started to panic. She got really upset and called, JP Morgan's headquarters in New York and asked for Jamie Dimon. She said she was told someone would call her back, but she says that never happened. She wrote a letter to Evan and Avi, and in there she laid out a number of things that were concerning her: unauthorized trading, the checking account. She had about $1 million worth of jewelry in a safe deposit box, and that her son Bobby had the key to that box, and that jewelry had gone missing. All this was kind of packaged in this, 5-page handwritten amendment to a will and trust.
There's such an evolving narrative about why the jewelry was taken. The only truth we really know is that the jewelry is gone. But why it happened, there have been a lot of different stories.
You just don't take your mother's wonderful things and hand it out.
And they emailed that note to JP Morgan to seize all activity on her account.
And it ended up setting off a firestorm after that. As soon as they got this email that there was a cease and desist and that she wanted to send her money and change brokerage firms, they were actually vacationing one floor below downstairs. They're there right now.
The next day, Beverly's in her place. The granddaughter's still in her place visiting. Dawn is there, and up comes Bobby kind of barging through the door. And he's screaming about what was sent to the JP Morgan. They're now investigating now. And he's furious, takes his mother and sort of puts her into a chair, gets pen and paper, and she says physically forced her to write a retraction letter.
They were pushing me around.
It was a scary time. I was really afraid too.
I had to take her to the doctor, and she did an x-ray because she was in so much pain.
The locks had to be changed. The phone number had to be changed. I really thought we were going to have to hire guards to be outside just for protection.
Oh, it was terrible.
Horrible scene.
Beverly brought her case before the Financial Industry Regulatory Authorities, usually known as FINRA. It took several months of hearings. She sees all sorts of transactions that's going on, hundreds of them that she claims that she never knew about, never authorized, but yet were logged in JP Morgan's files as having been direct requests from her. That included the sale of a large amount of Apple stock worth several $1 million, as well as all her stock in Big Lots. Over the course of their time with JP Morgan, Evan and Avi were making all sorts of trading on her account that was generating millions of dollars in commissions for themselves and the bank, yet she was not sort of getting any of the type of gains that you would expect sort of an $80 million account in a bullish market to be able to get. They issued a ruling entirely in her favor, finding that her grandsons, as well as JP Morgan, they were liable for violating their fiduciary duty, misrepresenting themselves, and they also found that the bank and her grandson, Evan, were liable for elder abuse. Evan and Avi, they were fired from JP Morgan. They issued an award of about $19 million. I reached out for comment, and JP Morgan emphasized that Evan and Avi were no longer with the firm and that their actions do not represent the sort of values of the bank. I reached out to Evan and Avi, heard back from their lawyer saying that, they disagree with the law and the facts that FINRA kind of used to decide the case against them and are seeing if they can have it withdrawn. Her son, Bobby, wrote her a letter, said his sons weren't criminals, and he also admits to taking her jewelry. And he says he needed it to pay off some bad business debts he had.
They never once came up to say, I'm sorry.
If there had been an apology and some acceptance, and asking for forgiveness from my grandmother, I don't think we'd be in the position that we are now.
Since the piece came out, we've received dozens of messages from people, many of whom are telling their own sort of personal tales of, kind of financial advisors gone bad, or family members who got control of an estate and abused, those within. It seems that it's really resonated with a lot of people. I keep, hearing a lot of feedback about Beverly and how, a lot of people feel she did the right thing.
You're never too old to stand up for yourself and try to right an injustice. She was adamant that she wanted to stand up for herself, but at the end of the day, they did wrong.
It's a painful life lesson. Beverly taught them that you don't mess with grandma.
On April 20th, oil markets did something they never had before, and they crashed, went into negative territory and closed the day at minus $40. Meanwhile, in a place called Thaden Boyce in Essex, a group of 9 traders, led by a guy called Cuddles, made $660 million over the course of a couple of hours.
The price of oil has collapsed to a record low.
We've never really seen anything like it. WTI this morning down more than 35%.
People maybe wouldn't have been so surprised if the oil price had fallen to zero, but the oil price went to minus 38. It went far lower than anyone had expected. And so lots of people in the market were saying, well, hang on, something else is going on here.
A couple of months later, I started to get wind through a kind of network of sources that a tiny firm in the outskirts of London had made a huge amount of money that day and potentially had some part to play in what happened.
The information we got was that 9 traders at Vega Capital London had made in the region of $660 million in one day. As a group, I think they made as much money in one day as Apple makes from its international sales in one day. I mean, it's an insane sum of money.
Did they pull off a fantastic trade? Did they predict the way the market was moving and get it absolutely right? Or was there something else going on, and had they actually done something that breached market rules in a bid to sort of push the market? And that investigation is ongoing. So Paul Commins is a trader who cut his teeth in the pits in the 80s and 90s when everyone had a nickname. His was Cuddles. If you can imagine, that was a very sort of cutthroat type of world where people are doing, hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars trades by shouting at each other, giving hand signals, and then sort of scrawling on scraps of paper.
The culture of the trading pits in London was very influenced by the working class guys who became traders there. They weren't like the city bankers that had gone before them. They weren't usually Oxford or Cambridge. They didn't wear Savile Row suits. They were ordinary working guys who happened to have a talent for trading. And a lot of them came from Essex.
I think it was 400 traders in the pits, and Cuddles in his oil and gas pit was described to us as amongst the top 3. Amongst that, was very successful and made very large amounts of money as a young man. But inevitably, mechanization and the arrival of electronic markets was the kind of death knell for the pits. And in 2005, the IPE closed down.
And when the pits shut down, a lot of the traders who worked there lost their jobs or quit or went to work for financial institutions. But Paul Commins decided to start his own trading collective out in Essex.
Some of them are ex-pit guys, cut from the same cloth as him. Lots of them are actually sort of in their 20s, and they're his, drinking buddy's son, or they're his own kids' friends from football. They're young lads, hungry and ambitious, and he brings them into the fold. And fairly shortly, he's got, maybe a dozen or so traders that they're independent, let's be clear, but they're all part of this collective.
Yeah, I'll let Liam deal with Essex.
I am from Essex, so I feel like I'm free to, to get into this.
Sweet, as they say.
If you were to ask someone in Britain how they would imagine a kind of Essex person, they would see someone who's maybe slightly flamboyant, with a sort of Cockney accent, a sort of Guy Ritchie-style accent. Not afraid to splash the cash, but it's probably pretty bright and has done well for themselves.
Don't even make sense, does it?
But, these guys, they drove around very nice Rolls Royces and Bentleys. They went to places like Marbella on holiday.
Thaden Boyce is a very wealthy place. You have to have considerable income to be able to afford to live in that village. It's a really nice place to live, and it's 20 minutes tube ride away from the city.
Earlier in the summer, we have this lead, which is that there's this tiny firm called Vega Capital London, and they were the biggest winners from the biggest oil crash in history. Anyone that covers markets is going to be surprised about that. You're thinking your BPs of the world or your Glencores, but there's this tiny firm.
And one of the big challenges that we had was actually finding out who worked with Vega Capital. It wasn't immediately obvious, and at first we had absolutely no idea. If you go to the Vega Capital website, it says it's under construction. If you do basic online searching, it's very difficult to find anyone who's publicly connected to the company.
So inevitably, we're incredibly curious at this point. Like, who the hell are these people?
The more reporting we did, the more it became clear that this group were connected socially as well as professionally. They went to weddings together, they played golf together, they would go on holiday together. We found out that a number of them were members of the West Ham Supporters Club in London. A few of them started companies together, so you could see all the connections between them and start to see a distinct group emerging.
And it really just was this kind of shock that, this wasn't just like a hedge fund or a firm you'd never heard of. This was actually a group of buddies who all had the same experience on this day and had all made a huge amount of money. So if you're an oil trader, there's a number of different ways you can trade, and probably the most popular is WTI Futures Contracts.
And it's basically a contract that says, I'm going to buy 1,000 barrels of oil from you at this point in the future, or I'm going to sell 1,000 barrels of oil to you at this point in the future.
It's actually just a financial contract to gamble on to predict whether oil is going to go up or down.
On the 20th of April in Essex, there had been signals for a while that this was going to be an exceptional day in oil markets. And we know that some of them arose early and started their trading in the early hours of the morning while it was still dark outside.
Essentially what they were doing is buying contracts that gave them an obligation to buy oil at whatever the price ended up at 2:30 p.m. So they're basically placing a bet that oil was going to fall throughout the day.
But they're simultaneously selling lots of oil as well. And whether they make a profit and how much profit they make is the difference between what they buy the oil for and what they sell the oil for. Now, of course, we now know throughout April 20th, the price dropped and dropped.
So this is going very well for them. They are committed to selling oil at these prices, and the prices are continuing to fall, which means they're going to be able to offset it and buy oil at cheaper at the end of the day. Now, once it gets to kind of 1:30, 2 p.m., that's when things start to get really interesting. Suddenly there's a kind of influx of buyers and sellers, as desperation increases in the market and trading volumes go up. Now at 2:08 p.m. exactly, something bizarre and unprecedented happened, which is that oil passes into negative territory.
And it fell to a record level of minus $38.
We've never seen anything like it, period, in terms of the contraction of the global economy.
That huge gulf between what they were buying the oil for and what they were selling it for enabled them to make more money than they ever thought possible.
So their profit was the difference between minus 37 and all of these positive numbers on every contract they sold.
The price of crude briefly hit minus $37 a barrel. For one group of traders operating from a small office, it was a very, very profitable day.
It's important to remember this had never happened before in the history of oil trading. No one could have predicted it.
I can't think of another example of where you enter a trade and you get paid on both sides. You get paid both to sell and to buy. It's unthinkable.
One thing we know about the Cuddles Trading Arcade is that they were very comfortable taking large risks. And, you have to be clear, this was a large risk.
Yeah, we spoke to oil traders, both people that know these guys and people that don't, and they all say that this is, incredibly risky.
And that's actually what stops a lot of oil traders doing trading like this. They simply aren't willing to stomach the risk. But Cuddles and his friends were.
So when the kind of final calculations came down, the group of the 9 most profitable traders made $660 million or thereabouts between them. I mean, if you can imagine, I think 3 or 4 of them made in excess of 100 million each.
One of the astonishing things about this trade is that 2 of the individuals who made more than $100 million in a single day were in their 20s. One of them was 22 years old. Only a few years earlier, he'd been posting on his social media about doing teenage stuff with his mates in town and going to see girls and rap music. And here he is a few years later making $100 million in a single day's trading. When me and Liam discovered that, we couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe what we were seeing. Oil trading is a zero-sum game. Anytime you're making money as an oil trader, someone else is losing it.
Amongst the biggest losers were the investors in this Chinese fund, Crude Oil Treasure Fund. There were thousands of them, and they lost everything.
Lots of people had put their savings into oil funds. They lost money that day. Big banks and brokers who sort of stand in the middle of trading parties, they lost money that day.
And another interesting thing is that oil-producing countries like Kuwait or Canada, they sell oil as an average of the WTI closing price over the preceding month. So the fact that one of those numbers in that average was minus 37 meant, if you can imagine, countries like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait potentially lost a couple of dollars on every single barrel of oil they sold that month.
Vega Capital's traders made such an extraordinary sum of money that it was inevitable there would be some scrutiny of what they did. But it wasn't just the sums of money they made. In the vital half an hour before the settlement price was set, they were by far the biggest sellers of oil futures in the market, which is an incredible thing to think about when you consider that the other participants in that oil market are going to be the world's biggest banks, oil majors, BP and Shell, and here you have a group of 9 guys in Essex who are having this significant influence over a global market for oil.
I mean, I think you have to assume that if these guys had made $7 million or $10 million, they probably would be celebrating in Essex right now. But the fact that they made closer to $700 million has meant that they are facing understandable scrutiny.
We wrote individually to all the Vega traders who did exceptionally well that day, and we got a letter in response from a law firm representing the group. The law firm was at pains to point out, number one, that they haven't been accused of any wrongdoing, that they all traded independently and separately, and they'd basically all made up their own minds that this was what was going to happen in oil markets based on publicly available knowledge, and decided to execute this trade.
What I love about these stories is there's a real variance of opinion, and some people will look at what happened and think that must be dodgy. They all traded at the end of the day. They all made a huge amount of money while all these people lost. That's shocking. But lots of people say these guys are at acute disadvantage. They're in a market that's inhabited by, huge technology-driven funds and firms and oil giants that have got all the advantages in the world, and when you get a bunch of Essex geezers who essentially beat the market and find a way to make a huge amount of money, they should get a pat on the back, really, because that's the dream. Since this happened, a lot of the guys have stopped trading the monthly settlements that they'd done so well at in the past. Several of them have set up new companies. They've essentially gone very quiet. Any kind of social media presence they had is kind of closed down. By all accounts, they're, waiting this out.
It's certainly too early to try and predict how the regulatory investigations are going to pan out. We just don't know. There's a number of potential outcomes for these guys. Potential punishments if there are any findings of manipulation against Vega or anyone affiliated with it might be you could be fined, you could be banned from trading, And, you know, in the most extreme cases, there have even been criminal prosecutions in the past of people who have been found to have been manipulating the settlement and misconduct related to trade at settlement. There are other outcomes too. You know, one obvious one is going to be that they're able to walk away from this life-changing trade with all the money that they made and celebrated as heroes in the trading community. That, you know, they'll go down as legends.
It's very important, given the nature of the climate crisis right now, for the general public to have an understanding of what progress is or is not actually happening. And I think many readers right now, they'll see these hundreds and hundreds of companies making these big, bold climate claims. And they would be forgiven to think that, you know, we're well on our way to meeting the emission reduction trajectory we need to be on. And the reality of the matter is we're just not on that trajectory. And a key reason for this sort of disconnect is the use of offsets that aren't doing what they claim to be doing.
We have a massive potential for sort of willful blindness. We can convince ourselves of things regardless of what the facts are. And so that's what tends to happen in these cases. It's not that anybody is setting out to commit climate fraud. They sort of walk themselves into a situation and they convince themselves of one thing, and that allows them to convince themselves of another thing. But at the end of the day, they're doing something that makes no sense at all.
My name is Ben Elgin. I wrote the story about how the billion-dollar market for carbon offsets is setting back the fight against climate change. So one of the challenges in reporting on carbon offsets and trying to figure out what's going on is really finding good experts who have been steeped in this marketplace and are willing to candidly talk about it. One of the best people for this is a fellow named Mark Trexler, and I've been talking to him for more than a decade.
My name is Mark Trexler. I've worked in climate change for the last 30 years. I was actually hired by the World Resources Institute in Washington to work on the first carbon offset project in 1988. In terms of defining a carbon offset, one of the beauties, so to speak, of greenhouse gases, sort of the silver lining of greenhouse gases, when you put up a molecule of CO2 into the atmosphere, it can be anywhere in the planet in 7 days. And therefore, you know, if there's an option to reduce emissions on the other side of the planet, and you can do that very cheaply as compared to doing it in your factory, for example, then why not pay that person, that factory on the other side of the planet to reduce their emissions? Then you are, in a sense, offsetting your emissions, and the atmosphere doesn't really see your emissions anymore.
So carbon offsets have been around for quite some time, and they were actually key with these international climate agreements, such as the Kyoto Protocol, which mandated the wealthiest countries reduce their greenhouse gas emissions.
The treaty was signed on the 11th of December, 1997.
Decided. The business community in general saw carbon offsets as a huge opportunity to comply with whatever policies and measures might be coming down the pike on climate change much more cost effectively.
We've seen a huge surge in companies making big proclamations about how they're going carbon neutral or zeroing out all of their carbon emissions.
We're going to reduce our carbon footprint to net zero.
Unilever is committing to net zero emissions.
We can achieve a net zero emissions world.
we began looking at these corporate claims of dramatically reduced emissions, and we noticed so many of these companies were using carbon offsets to achieve these aims. And as we began to look at the carbon offset projects themselves, what we found is that the environmental benefits claimed by these companies are not actually what they seem to be. And as we sort of saw and spotted a number of these very aggressive carbon offset projects, which appeared to be generating inflated credits or bogus credits, we saw a number of them were associated with the Nature Conservancy. This surprised us. The Nature Conservancy is the world's biggest environmental group. They have about $1 billion a year in revenues, and they've been around for 7 decades. They've preserved about 125 million acres of land, and they've done so many good works over the years, and they've been very strong in terms of working with corporate partners. The Nature Conservancy has taken a different approach, a very pragmatic and pro-business approach. They will not go out and criticize a big polluter, but they're very happy to work with them. Some might say that, well, that's selling out, but others would say, and those at the Nature Conservancy would say, these companies have deep pockets. They can help fund important preservation work, and we have absolutely no problem working with them on this stuff. So companies are very warm, and they've partnered with the Nature Conservancy for many years. And yeah, it definitely lends a sheen of credibility to these projects.
Here's 20 new reasons to visit Disney World this year. 1, 2,
if you look at, for instance, Disney, that's a sprawling company with theme parks and cruise lines that burn up diesel fuel. They have office buildings and television studios that consume electricity. So these companies are trying to make major reductions in their carbon footprints, but it's very difficult to change these fundamental ways their businesses operate. So Disney has been a big buyer of carbon offsets that are orchestrated by the Nature Conservancy. One of the projects that they buy from is called Pennsylvania Ridges. And that's a plot of land. Most of the land is actually about a 3-hour drive outside of Philadelphia. Interestingly, this land, 3,000 of these acres, was actually acquired by the Nature Conservancy in the late 1990s. This land was imminently threatened. There was a pending logging contract on this land. So they do what they've done so well for all of these years, which is they go out, they raise money from local philanthropists, and they go buy this land to protect it from developers and loggers. And at the time, according to an archived version of the Nature Conservancy's website, when they were proudly announcing this deal, they said, these threats have been abated because of this acquisition by the Nature Conservancy. So it's really interesting now, fast forward 2 decades to earlier this year when they put forward this carbon project. And if you look through it, this land is a key part of that carbon project. And what they're now saying is this land is now, once again, imminently threatened. 72% of the trees are going to be cut within 5 years. Now, this is just astounding because this land is owned by the Nature Conservancy. They do not clear-cut land that they've bought through philanthropic donations. So this scenario that they've put forward to get carbon revenues is not really plausible. And what that means is when you have Disney coming in and buying these credits, when it eventually lowers its carbon footprint because of these credits, well, that won't be a credible or truthful claim by Disney. So this is an organization that truly understands the threat of the issue of climate change and is wanting to do its part to address this. However, in this situation, it just appears their drive, which they've had for decades, to increase the amount of revenues that it can use for land preservation work. Nature Conservancy and many others see that the carbon credits as a pot of money that they can tap into to further their own benevolent aims. But unfortunately, what this has resulted in is claims of climate progress that just aren't really happening. So the Nature Conservancy defends vigorously these deals, and they and others will say, look, our projects are just following the rules that these registries set up. So some would also put some of the blame on the registries themselves because they're setting up the rules which allow these vapid projects to get up and sold. So we've reached out to all of the companies we mentioned in this story, including Disney. They didn't want to be interviewed for this story, but they all told us that, look, we have to rely on the experts out there, and those experts, they say, are these carbon registries that have been set up. Most of these Nature Conservancy deals are set up and sold on this exchange. It's called the American Carbon Registry. Now, it's the oldest of these registries that allow voluntary carbon credits to be sold. They've been around since 1996. What these offset registries do is they set up rules, and any carbon offset project has to follow those rules. But there's this tension that's always there. If the rules are too strict, then it's going to be very hard for carbon offset projects to get up and running. So there's this balance going on where the registries want rules that attract projects, but they don't want it to be so strict where it will disincentivize projects from getting listed.
One of the challenges with designing carbon offset systems is that there are normally two people at the table. You have buyers and you have sellers. And to some extent, you have policymakers, but you know, the buyers and the sellers are really the ones with the expertise, with the incentive to really participate hard, make a lot of things happen. And the challenge there is that both of them sort of want the same thing, or they're both happy with the same thing. They're happy with low-cost offsets and a lot of them, because that works for their business model. You end up, though, with nobody representing the atmosphere, so to speak. Nobody's really representing the climate in those discussions. And so the policies end up biasing the whole system. And you end up in sort of a race to the bottom. And that's what we've seen happen. You know, when it comes specifically to the topic of carbon offsets, you know, I am a fan of carbon offsets in the sense that they can help mitigate climate change. They absolutely can. But, you know, if we're not going to do it correctly in a way that actually does help mitigate climate change, then it's nothing but a distraction. And, you know, after 30 years, you have to start wondering, is it really just a distraction? And that's really unfortunate, but that's where we are. Ultimately, what needs to happen is systemic change. You know, we're sort of nibbling around the edges with some of these different things. We need to change how we produce energy. We need to change how we transport ourselves. We need to change what and how we eat. You know, we need systemic change associated with transitioning to a low carbon economy. A lot of what we're doing today is not promoting systemic change. It's sort of trying to stick your thumb in the dike to preserve the current system. And at the end of the day, that can't really work.
The Hyperloop. there's a good chance you've heard the name by now.
This is the Hyperloop system. It can take people hundreds of miles in minutes.
The Hyperloop, a series of tubes that would transport people in pods at ultra-high speeds over long distances.
This is a remarkable new form of transportation that can whisk people from city to city in a flash.
29 minutes from New York to D.C., 30 minutes from L.A. to San Francisco.
For years, we've been seeing these futuristic, utopian renderings of some cross between a spaceship and a monorail. But lately, the Hyperloop is becoming much more real.
Yes! It was surreal to be even sitting inside a Hyperloop, and just even more incredible to actually be like riding down a track in something that was nothing more than a crazy idea 6 years before.
Companies all around the world have been developing and testing the technology needed to propel passengers at speeds of over 1,000 kilometers per hour. But for many, speed is only the first step to unlocking the full transformational effects of a new mode of transportation.
Fast is what we just sort of take for granted in the Hyperloop world. It's the network effects that really deliver the benefit. And that opens up a completely different scale of economic opportunity.
We've got planes, trains, automobiles, and boats for getting around Earth. But what if there was a fifth mode? And I have a name for it, which is called the Hyperloop.
The Hyperloop?
Hyperloop, yeah.
In 2013, while riding high on the growing success of Tesla and SpaceX, entrepreneur Elon Musk released a white paper outlining the basic framework of the technology he called Hyperloop. The basic idea goes a little something like this. A tube reduces the air pressure to a near vacuum-like environment. A Hyperloop pod is then suspended in the tube, usually by magnetic levitation. The whole pod can then be propelled forward. Because there's no traditional friction sources like air resistance or rolling friction that would push back against the pod, the Hyperloop is able to move at incredibly high speeds and do so fairly efficiently. Despite its futuristic name, however, the general concept behind Hyperloop is actually pretty old. In fact, New York City's first attempt at an underground public transit system in the 1870s was based on a similar principle. The pneumatic transit system was short-lived, however, only stretching one block and topping out at a rather leisurely 10 miles per hour. While Elon would make some 21st century improvements to this concept and bestow a very 21st century name, he wouldn't end up pursuing the technology itself, instead electing to focus his efforts on something a little bit deeper, literally digging the requisite tunnels via his boring company. It would take another billionaire industrialist who dabbles in spaceflight. No, wait, not that one. Yeah, that's the one. After Richard Branson would make a large investment in the company Hyperloop One, it would be renamed to Virgin Hyperloop.
What we've always been trying to do as a company is show that this technology could work, that it could be made safe, and that ultimately it's something that's happening in the next couple of years, not the next 20 years.
Josh Geigel is the co-founder and CEO of Virgin Hyperloop. In a familiar tech startup story, he's seen the project go from a garage to a large-scale testing facility outside of Las Vegas.
So we started building the first kind of Hyperloop system in 2016. We've done a lot of work, about 500 tests that we've done on that over the last 5 years. And what we realized that we need to do is take that technology, show that it can be commercial, so drive the cost down, improve the efficiency, improve the performance. But the key thing is actually making it approachable and safe for individuals.
In order to do that, Josh, along with Virgin's head of passenger experience, Sarah Lucian, bravely volunteered to take the inaugural ride.
What her and I were realizing is we're the first two people sitting in a Hyperloop. The only type of people that have gone through this environment are in spacesuits, and there we are in just normal clothes because of the system, the safety of what we've designed.
3, 2, 1, launch.
And then once we started going, you felt a bit of acceleration. We accelerated a little bit harder than we would in commercial. It'd be like a sports car. Yes. We got to about 108 miles an hour on that test. And it's a short run. It's about 500 yards or so. And came to a stop.
The test, lasting only about 20 seconds and covering only a quarter of a mile at just over 100 miles per hour, is a long way away from a true functioning Hyperloop. But as for optics, it's a crucial step for the future of funding.
The number one question we got from investors or from project proponents or just people in general was like, is a Hyperloop safe? And what better way to show something is safe than by actually getting people on it?
But convincing investors and governments that would likely be fronting some of the construction costs for an unproven technology is no easy task. First and foremost is the question of safety.
Most people don't know how an airplane works, but yet they get on an airplane. They get on an airplane because, it's faster than driving, and most importantly, they've probably gotten off of one before, they've seen someone get off of one before. And so what we set out to do was actually show that Hyperloop could be safe with two normal people, not astronauts, not adrenaline junkies or test pilots or anything like that. Two normal people getting on a Hyperloop, and then most importantly, those two people getting off.
But beyond safety concerns, constructing Hyperloops will undoubtedly require a significant capital investment to the estimated tune of around $60 million per kilometer of track. So a track from San Francisco to Los Angeles, for example, is likely to come with a price tag over $10 billion. And before large governments are willing to come in and front those costs, investors who are funding Hyperloop development must accept it as a long-term mixture of technology and infrastructure investing.
Investors that are used to short returns because you're developing apps or something to that effect, those aren't the investors that really get excited about Hyperloop. What you start to see is the people that are looking at platform technologies, right? So this idea that because the smartphone existed, Uber could exist, right? So who are like the Vanderbilts of this century? And that's the part where you're going to get a lot more no's than yeses. But those people that have the ability, the fortitude to stick it out, to see the game-changing platform here, those are the people that we're looking for. And since we've done that passenger test, there has been a lot of interest that's really, this is a lot sooner than I thought.
Envisioning the ripple effects of what Hyperloop could achieve, though, is fairly challenging at this stage of development. It's fast, yes, but for point-to-point travel, traditional maglev trains can move pretty fast as well. And outside of China, South Korea, and Japan, even those haven't seen much adoption elsewhere due to the high costs and questionable profitability. The Shanghai line in China, for example, loses around $100 million every year. Hyperloop companies, however, believe they can offer something different than traditional railway lines.
My name's Alan James, and as far as I know, I'm the only guy on the planet who's written a government-level business case for 300 kmh conventional high-speed rail, 500 kmh maglev, and 1,000 kmh Hyperloop. It's fundamentally about moving people from where they are to where they want to go, when they want to make those journeys, and doing it in much smaller numbers. So pod designs for Hyperloop range from 12 to 28 seats, typically. Why are they small? It's because small enables the network to operate flexibly. And a great example of that is the east-west strategic route across the north of England, from Liverpool to Manchester to Leeds. So to get from Liverpool via Manchester to Leeds by train is just short of 2 hours today. It'll probably take you 2 hours driving as well in average traffic conditions. Net result is those three city regions remain three separate entities: Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds. There's very little commuting traffic between those urban areas. Hyperloop absolutely changes that from the ground up. Liverpool to Manchester is a 5 or 6 minute journey. Manchester to Leeds is also a 5 or 6 minute journey. What that effectively does is create a single supercity economy.
In this vision, the Hyperloop acts a little more like a highway, where pods have fixed destinations and don't need to stop along the way. Meaning you can travel on a Hyperloop network from, say, Liverpool to Leeds, while the pod behind you travels from Liverpool to Manchester. And if that metro Hyperloop network is connected to other networks from the same location, you could travel from Liverpool to Paris or Liverpool to Amsterdam, all without making a single stop.
For passengers, for business, for leisure, that is utterly transformational. For high-value freight and logistics, it's equally transformational. But critically, if you do a Hyperloop network at scale, you begin to deliver massively significant carbon savings too.
A multi-regional Hyperloop network could become a replacement for both short-haul passenger and cargo flights and traditional ground transportation, both of which are significant carbon producers.
One Hyperloop-connected distribution hub, perhaps at an airport that is predominantly used for international air freight, replacing maybe 10, 12, 15 distributed road hubs. It takes a lot of polluting and inefficient truck haulage off the roads. That itself means roads gain extra capacity.
Hyperloops will still need to use electricity to both move pods and maintain the near-vacuum environment in the tube. Proponents of the technology believe that this can be done by using renewable sources, including a combination of solar panels and battery technology that could be used along the Hyperloop itself. But even with all multipliers of time and carbon emission savings that a Hyperloop network may provide, the investment capital required to actually build such a network becomes even more economically and politically daunting.
Committing doesn't mean spending billions on day one. Committing means, how do we phase it?
One company in the Netherlands is working to develop that technology, and perhaps more importantly, the international coalition needed to make the Hyperloop network a reality.
So we are here in Europe's first full-scale Hyperloop test facility, where we can already prove every conceptual technology of the Hyperloop.
This is Tim Houter, a co-founder and CEO of Hart Hyperloop, headquartered in the city of Delft. And while this testing tube might not seem as large as others, inside is a key technology to create the on- and off-ramp type infrastructure of a Hyperloop network. That is, a lane switch.
That's something we can already test here. You can actually see it here, that the track is diverging from one track into two. That makes it possible to eventually split up the Hyperloop track in two sections. And in that sense, you can create a complete Hyperloop network that in the end will make it possible to travel, for example, over a whole continent. Take Europe, for example, with the same ease as you can now travel with a metro in a city.
The nice thing about this magnetic levitation system that we've developed is that there's absolutely zero moving components in the track. So for example, if you have to do a lane switch, all you do is that the tube basically splits up, and statically the tracks also split up. And whenever the vehicle enters a switch, it either pulls itself to the right with its magnets, or it pulls itself to the left with its magnets.
Lane switching on traditional rail requires the physical movement of the rail. Even modern magnetic levitation tracks use lane switching techniques in order to transfer trains from one track to another.
And this is a very crucial element, because this is the thing that limits the capacity and, in the end, the usefulness of the rail network. Because the moment that a track is switching, that means that at that moment you are creating an unsafe environment for the trains behind it. So you need a lot of space between trains. But in a Hyperloop, because you have no moving components in the track, all the vehicles can be much closer to each other. You can achieve a very high frequency and basically have your vehicles moving and merging in and out of the network very much like a highway.
For now, though, Hart's physical testing has been limited by the size of their tube. Because the test track is only 30 meters long, they haven't tested this lane switch at speeds greater than 20 kilometers per hour. However, the company is working to build a new test site where it plans to increase that testing speed to 300 kilometers per hour.
We're now in a phase where we have proven most of the most important technologies in the test facilities that we already have. And we have also demonstrated the viability and the feasibility of a network. If you look at all the subsystems that it consists of, most of those are proven systems, already demonstrated in lab conditions. So we don't really believe that the technology itself is going to be the biggest challenge.
Because for all Hyperloop companies out there, actually building a Hyperloop system requires more than just a good product.
We're talking about the safety aspects, we're talking about integration into the environment, we're talking about the social aspects. Do people feel comfortable traveling in such a system? So it's about all these different aspects, and the complexity is really getting all the different stakeholders that are relevant and that do need to contribute to bring this to market, to get them all following the same roadmap.
In order to help build this coalition of private and public interest in Hyperloop development, HART in 2018 partnered with other Hyperloop companies from Europe and Canada. The goal was to define, establish, and standardize the framework to regulate Hyperloop systems.
Right now we are working with all the Hyperloop developers together in setting up the first, let's say, structure for starting the standards drafting.
One of the most important goals for HART is interoperability, which is essentially making sure the different systems can communicate with each other.
Interoperability is so important because what we want to achieve is actually have this seamless travel experience. So you don't want to end up, for example, going from Madrid to Paris and then switching because you need to use a different technology to get, for example, to Amsterdam.
The idea being that as companies around Europe create the first commercial Hyperloop tracks between individual cities, one day those can all be connected to a larger network.
Everyone that believes that Hyperloop is a future transport system also realizes that there is a need to have this network because that's where Hyperloop thrives.
Hyperloop is such a huge project. It's definitely not something that you can do on your own or as a single company. So you need to do it with a lot of other companies. You need to have the governments. I think in that sense, the biggest challenge that we've encountered is to really get all the required parties together to take the steps in development and commercial implementation.
HART's next plan is to build the European Hyperloop Center, an open testing facility which will include a 2.6-kilometer test track. And the company hopes to test travel speeds there at up to 700 kilometers per hour. Virgin Hyperloop is also racing to construct the first commercial Hyperloop route, with projects in various states of development in India, Saudi Arabia, and the United States. Recently, the company announced plans to build a Hyperloop certification center in West Virginia, which will include a 6-mile-long test track. Proving the technology here will be crucial if Hyperloop networks can find a home among infrastructure investments that the Biden administration hopes to make.
The idea that there's multiple Hyperloop companies, I think, is a redeeming aspect in the business. People really want to see something happen, so having multiple people move forward is good for that.
I was struck when Josh and Sarah rode the pod. 2 or 3 of the major outlets used the phrase, "We now have a new mode of transport." And although all of that technology had existed before those 2 human beings rode it, it was the moment at which those 2 human beings traveled that short distance down the tube that in popular imagination, Hyperloop became a mode of transport.
The metaphor I use with my team is that, the Wright brothers were first, but none of us fly on Wright Brothers Airlines anymore. If you don't continue to innovate, you're not going to be around, and so we'll continue to be at the forefront of building Hyperloop.
Back in 2013, Elon had an idea. I think the difference now in 2021 is some brilliant engineers have spent real time grinding out the details. And I thoroughly expect the next 3 to 5 years to be decisive.
This week, how hydrogen can transform our energy usage. We'll look at why the universe's most abundant element could be a game changer in the climate revolution.
Hydrogen technologies are not new. They are used in other sectors. We use them in space, on our rockets, and we don't need the laws of physics to change to be able to use hydrogen on our planes.
From iron ore to green hydrogen, one of Australia's richest men tells us about his pivot to sustainable energy.
Let's take action. It's practical, it's implementable. Let's do it now.
Plus, the hydrogen revolution. We'll speak with the CEO of Italian utilities firm Snam about his new book and how green hydrogen could be competitive within 5 years.
Costs are coming down and people are waking up to the fact that it's the only way to decarbonize certain sectors.
From Bloomberg's global headquarters in New York, I'm Kaylee Lyons, and this is Bloomberg Green. It's a new year, so here at Bloomberg Green, we're highlighting new solutions in the fight against climate change. And one of those is as old as the universe itself, hydrogen. It's the simplest element around, but could well be a game changer when it comes to turning around our dependence on fossil fuels. Today, hydrogen is used in the chemicals industry to produce petroleum products. It's also starting to be used in steel production, an industry under a lot of pressure to decarbonize. But it has far more uses as well, from powering cars to heating our homes. And Bloomberg New Energy Finance sees a seismic shift in the sector in the next 10 years as green hydrogen squeezes out dirtier alternatives. So-called gray hydrogen dominates today. But as renewable electricity gets cheaper and more accessible, so will green hydrogen. In this week's edition of Bloomberg Green, we'll explore what this push into hydrogen means for tackling climate change. We'll hear from Australian billionaire Twiggy Forrest about his pivot from iron ore to hydrogen, and we'll also speak with the CEO of Italian utility company Snam about his book, The Hydrogen Revolution. But first, what are we using hydrogen for? And why does it actually matter? Christine Lee Edwards explains.
Hydrogen, the most plentiful element in the universe.
On Earth, we find it mostly bonded to oxygen in the form of water, or in other gases known as hydrocarbons. Hydrogen gas, H2, burns hot and clean, making it an attractive tool in the race to net zero. But isolating hydrogen from other elements is no easy task. Today, the cheapest way to do this is via chemical processes that break up natural gas. This releases a lot of carbon dioxide. Another method is to use electricity to split water molecules in a process called electrolysis. Although there is no carbon byproduct, a lot of electricity is needed. And if this power comes from burning coal or gas, it negates the zero emissions goals of using hydrogen to begin with. Hydrogen produced in this way, powered by fossil fuels, is called gray hydrogen. If carbon capture and storage is used together with fossil fuels, then it becomes blue hydrogen. If nuclear power is used, it's called pink. And finally, green hydrogen is when it's produced via electrolysis and powered from renewable sources. This method is considered emissions-free. It's predicted that by the early 2030s, H2 made from renewables will be cheaper than that made from fossil fuels. But that hinges on the cost of electrolysis declining, which will be achieved through larger projects and an expansion of manufacturing. To be clear, vast amounts of H2 are already used today. Global production in 2018 totaled 117 million metric tons. This hydrogen is mostly used for its chemical properties, not as a source of energy, and very little of it is clean. Some sectors like steel could start using hydrogen for these chemical properties, replacing coal. Industries like cement and glass may also use hydrogen as a source of heat. Another advantage is its energy storage potential. It can be stored over long periods of time and used when more power needs to be added to the grid. It also could hold an advantage over batteries in heavy transport and shipping. The promise of hydrogen for energy has been around since at least 1874, when Jules Verne wrote about it in his book, The Mysterious Island. But the future of hydrogen will depend on policy. Countries with net zero targets, carbon pricing, and hydrogen strategies with investment mechanisms are likely to see the highest H2 demand.
That was Bloomberg's Christine Lee Edwards explaining what hydrogen means for the energy transition. But how are businesses approaching the sector? Well, one of Australia's richest men is making a big play into hydrogen. Andrew Forrest, better known as Twiggy, made his fortune from iron ore, being the chairman, former CEO, and major shareholder in Fortescue Metals, one of the world's biggest miners. But after having made over $10 billion in profit from the metal in the last fiscal year, Twiggy wants to transform Fortescue into a clean energy company. He's been scouring the planet in search of investment opportunities in hydrogen and renewables. The firm plans to allocate up to 10% of its annual profits for green energy investments and is exploring projects across the globe, from Indonesia to Argentina. Francine Lacqua caught up with Twiggy Forrest.
There's only one type of clean hydrogen, all the rest is dirty.
Yeah.
That is green. If you just say green hydrogen is clean, the rest is dirty, then you've actually nailed it. And, you know, anyone else who produces any other rubbish, any other argument, just look them in the eye and say, why is global warming accelerating if anything you're saying is true? And then you'll know, actually, it's greenwashing.
Yeah, but there's a lot of greenwashing because I keep on being told it's a transition. We can't just, make the transition at a click of a finger. So what are we doing wrong? What can we do better?
I don't remember the personal computer having to transition the typewriter. I really don't remember that. I don't remember the smartphone having to transition the pocket calculator and the old landline. You know, its transition line is complete rubbish. The lie got put to it 2 days ago when JCB, a really loved British company, every right for the country to be proud of JCB, and Fortescue, holding a bit of a similar reputation, fantastic track record, everyone's done super well from Fortescue, huge balance sheet, super strong. When those two companies got together and agreed a $7 to $9 billion US agreement per annum, right, then that's a real wake-up call to say, hang on, green hydrogen is obviously commercial now. You know, every other form of fossil fuel hydrogen, you know, it can compete with it on price, it can probably lose on price, but what we know, it is cooking the planet. And only green hydrogen zero methane, zero carbon in the supply chain. Don't worry about the molecules in the supply chain.
But at the moment, we're not even phasing out coal, if you look at the G20 communique. So we have a long way to go to talk about only using green hydrogen.
Yeah, so look, I have a call, which I'd like to make now, that the world should not fund any more coal-fired power stations, coal mining projects, ever. We should wind them down as quickly as possible because they are cooking the planet just like grey and blue hydrogen is cooking the planet.
Yeah.
You know, hydrogen, which is not made from renewable electricity, is releasing 10 to 16 times more carbon, let alone the methane, which is worse, than it is hydrogen. So we've just got to stop doing things which are self-harming under the guise of greenwashing.
So why are leaders so slow? Even if you look at the appetite for ESG investments, they're growing exponentially, so are emissions. So where are we allocating capital?
Okay, so take the recent G20. There's probably a reason why there wasn't strong action coming out of the G20 because people were not aware that major transactions between large companies were taking place now on green hydrogen. That actually this pollution-free all the way to the supply chain fuel is now being transacted at multi-billion-dollar scale. If they'd known that, I don't believe any sovereign leader or any energy minister or climate change minister could not take ultra seriously that green hydrogen is now here to stay. It's broken through. History has been made. It will never go back.
Okay, what is the one thing that you would tell leaders today and business leaders? How do we transition faster than what we are now because we're at real risk of missing our targets?
Oh, so that's really simple. You stop funding, you stop subsidizing, you stop
using
money into fossil fuels. It could be carbon sequestration, it could be fuel rebates, could be anything. Hundreds of billions of dollars getting ashed while we ash the planet on fossil fuel subsidies. Because we haven't had that renewable electricity, we haven't had that green hydrogen, it's kind of been pushed down. It's all sorts of excuses. Oh, it'll never be commercial, it'll never be supplied in the quantities we need it, you know, blah, blah, blah. Now we know, let's take action. It's practical, it's implementable, let's do it now.
Okay, if we do it now, is there going to be a shock to the energy system? Is there going to be a shock actually to economically? And is it worth, you know, not talking about transition, just going from A to B?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. A to B is the solution. Let fossil fuels do what fossil fuels do. Just burn their coal, burn their oil, burn their gas. At least they're pumping up carbon and methane into the atmosphere honestly. Well, not that honest because they don't measure methane, which is 90 times worse than carbon. But at least the carbon is being done honestly. Encourage the green hydrogen sector to come in really fast. Okay, it's there. There's renewable power all over the world. We now know how to make electrolyzers much cheaper, like 25% of the original cost. We know how to do that now. We don't have an excuse to get into it.
Does it need to be cheaper than oil and fossil fuel for it to be viable worldwide?
Well, right now it is. Okay, so let's just swallow that bit of financial data. Right now it is cheaper, and it's getting more cheap. It's the only fuel you know of which is declining in value.
You don't have enough of it, right, to power the world.
Yes, that's only because we haven't had policies to support it. If we had policies to support it 5-10 years ago, it would be everywhere. You'd see the global warming budget start to come down. Now, we've got 5 or 10 years to make a huge difference. I need policy leaders all over the world to appreciate now, okay, big business is transacting with green hydrogen in multi-billion-dollar agreements. We now know it's here and it's here to stay. Let's spread it everywhere.
Coming up on the program, the hydrogen revolution. We'll speak with the CEO of Italian utility firm Snam about his new book and why he thinks green hydrogen will be competitive in just 5 years. Plus, how are airlines working to become more sustainable? We'll look at how Airbus plans to step up in the climate fight. This is Bloomberg Green. Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York, I'm Kaylee Lyons, and this is Bloomberg Green. What will the world look like in 2050? Will global temperatures have stabilized, electric vehicles be abundant, and solar and wind power homes around the world? According to Marco Alvera, the CEO of Italian energy company Snam, that vision of the future could be a reality. And he says that hydrogen will pave its way. As he tells it in his new book, The Hydrogen Revolution, Alvera's moment of reckoning came in November 2018 when he tasked the Snam Scenarios team with studying how Europe could reduce its CO2 emissions to zero by 2050. Looking through the results of the study, Alvera said he was struck by how much hydrogen was in Europe's energy mix by that year. Beyond the abundance of hydrogen, the SNAM model also predicted that it would be the cheapest form of decarbonized energy for many sectors, and that it could be cheaper than today's prices for oil, coal, and nuclear power. Our Maria Tadeo spoke with Alvera at COP26.
It's happening all very fast. We see the cost of hydrogen coming down a lot. Hydrogen will play a big role in the energy mix. I don't know if it's going to be 15 or 25% of a fully decarbonized energy system, but it's going to be big. Costs are coming down, and people are waking up to the fact that it's the only way to decarbonize certain sectors, so-called hard-to-abate sectors.
And you say it's the only way and the costs are coming down. Where do you see prices moving? Because a lot of the reticence at times has to do with the pricing, that some argue, well, it's still not the cheapest option on the market.
So when I was first working in hydrogen in 2004, it was costing $1,000 per megawatt hour. 2010, $600. Today, $100, and we see it going down to $50 in 5 years' time, and to going down to $25 per megawatt hour in the next 10 years or so, which is a quarter of where it is today. That's really because renewable energy, and we're talking green hydrogen here, renewable energy costs are falling, but the cost of making the electrolyzer, which is the kit that you use to convert solar or wind energy and water into hydrogen, the cost of this kit is falling a lot because it doesn't really exist on an industrial scale. So as we build up capacity, we industrialize it, we standardize it, and we squeeze costs out. That's really the cost trajectory.
And for that, of course, you need demand, however, for governments and also institutions to kind of buy into this idea that it is the future and we want to invest and create infrastructure. What are they telling you? When you speak to governments, when you speak to officials, are they keen on this?
They're very keen. So the Department of Energy shares our view in the States of getting to below $1 a kilo, which is $25 a megawatt hour. The European Union has a hydrogen strategy, which is very clear, and several member states have the same. Chile wants to export a lot of hydrogen. China's big on hydrogen. Australia's very big on hydrogen. Japan is blending already hydrogen. So I would say the world is now really focused on this because it's the only way to store energy for a long period of time economically is to convert it into either a liquid or a gas.
And of course, you talk about the price, but the other big component is the volume. You know, how big can you go? Where do you see that on a time scale?
So wherever it's sunny or windy, you can produce very cheap hydrogen eventually. And so compared to oil and gas, which are concentrated in few parts of the world, it's going to be very democratic from that point of view. So every sunny place, every desert, every ocean wind can be turned into hydrogen that we can put on ships, in pipes, and really start trading it around the world. So it's going to happen a lot faster than a lot of people think.
So, and when you say a lot faster, what is that in time?
As I said, $50, which is essentially oil parity within 5 years. And then, depending on how quickly we ramp it up after that, we could get to $25, which is coal parity before the end of the decade.
And in big scale.
In big scale, because once you get to coal parity, that's the only way we're going to get China and India to stop burning new coal. We have businesses in China and in India, and I see a lot of hydrogen development, a lot of renewable development in both countries. The India announcement was incredibly strong on 2030. Some people were upset about the 2017 net zero deadline, but when it comes to 30, he announced a big commitment to get to 50% renewables.
Were you surprised by it?
I was surprised that they would make it so explicit, and even the net zero is a big thing for them. And so I think it will happen faster than 2070 because of the falling cost of renewable and hydrogen. India's burning 80 gigawatt of oil, of diesel, to keep the lights on. So there's an immediate opportunity there, and we're very interested in working in that country.
And with regards to China, perhaps the fact that we haven't really seen them active, I guess the diplomats are working on this, but we haven't really seen the leadership.
It's going to be technology, it's going to be industry. I think China has committed to a net zero, which is very important. At the G20, China was clearly behind the 1.5 degrees. So I think a lot has been achieved between the G20 and COP, and I think what's really important is to see in the coming years how quick it's in our hands to make part of this happen in 5 years, or it could otherwise happen in 15, 20 years. It's about building the project. The capital is there. We saw how many trillions of dollars are already committed. What's missing is really the projects, and that's where companies like us step in.
Marco Alvera, CEO of SNAM there, speaking with our Maria Tadeo. Let's turn now to the aviation industry. It's a big contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions, and it's under pressure to change that. In October, the International Air Transport Association, a trade body representing airlines, approved a target of achieving net zero emissions by 2050. To achieve that, many airlines in the US and Europe are looking to buy sustainable aviation fuel made from renewable sources like used vegetable oil. Initiatives like these are pushing plane makers to come up with some radical new aircraft that will eventually cater to our growing appetite for travel without hurting the environment. We took a look at how Airbus, the world's #2 aircraft manufacturer, is stepping up to the challenge.
How long until we can fly emission-free? Airbus says it's more confident by the day it can be done by its 2035 target. Airbus's CEO spoke about its ambitions for hydrogen-powered planes at the company's summit in France.
The physics works. Hydrogen technologies are not new. They are used in other sectors. We use them in space on our rockets, and we don't need the laws of physics to change to be able to use hydrogen on our planes. So every day we become more confident, but we think we need to have a plane, we need to have the right fuels, the hydrogen available in the right quantity at the right place at the right time, and we need the regulations to be ready. So we really need the work and the collaboration of many people around the globe to make it happen on time.
But it could be a long wait until green passenger jets go mainstream. Larger aircraft with more than 150 seats are not expected to feature globally until about 2050. That means manufacturers and airlines today are under growing pressure to ramp up short-term innovations to cut their carbon. In the long term, meeting the ambitious plans for so-called green hydrogen means building a giant industry almost from scratch. To make that happen, British airline EasyJet is among those saying governments need to get involved and fast. Aviation's emissions over the last 3 decades leading up to the pandemic grew by about 80% to over 1 gigaton, and that's projected to double by 2050. According to Bloomberg NEF, about half of the airlines with the largest global market share have set net zero targets by that same date, nearly 3 decades away.
Coming up, from blue sky projects to the bottom line. We'll speak with our Bloomberg NEF expert Meredith Annex and dig into their models about how hydrogen fits into the future energy mix. This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's World Headquarters in New York, I'm Kaylee Lyons, and this is Bloomberg Green. Now let's bring in Meredith Annex, our Bloomberg NEF hydrogen specialist, to talk more about how hydrogen could change the energy landscape. So Meredith, what place do you think hydrogen is likely to have in the future energy mix globally?
Hydrogen's this incredible solution for us as we look to decarbonize because it's a perfect solution in areas that are hard to electrify. So where we like to think about hydrogen playing a role, it's in things like heavy industry, especially where you need a feedstock as well as energy source, and in things like dispatchable power, long-haul transport, maybe even shipping and aviation.
That sounds great that it can be used for such diverse industries. At the end of the day, though, how much is this going to cost?
Well, that's the amazing thing about hydrogen, because depending on how you make it, it can actually see significant cost declines in the future. So when we're talking about clean hydrogen, we usually mean green hydrogen produced from renewable electricity. And in that case, your hydrogen is almost as cheap as the renewables that are used to make it. So if you're in a place with really good renewable resources, you'll be able to have cheaper hydrogen. But even in places with less good resources, we think that hydrogen can be cheaper than $1 per kilogram, which is the price of unabated hydrogen today, and around $8 per million BTUs for those who prefer to think in energy units. And that can be achieved anywhere in the world by 2050, we believe.
All right, so let's talk about kind of the pros and cons list. I don't know where cost fits into that, but what are the advantages to hydrogen over other renewables, and then what are the drawbacks?
Yeah, main advantage is the fact that hydrogen can serve roles that electrons struggle with. And that's things like seasonal storage, for instance, or just anything where you need storability, where electrons are harder to store, hydrogen is going to be easier. That also leads to a downside, though, because hydrogen is less energy dense than the usual things that we use for storable energy today, like coal or oil or natural gas. So you will need more volume of storage to handle the same amount of energy.
Let's talk about the viability as well and how it may differ in different geographies. What is your view on that?
Yeah, so for green hydrogen, again, from renewable electricity, really places with the best renewable resources, things like Latin America or the Middle East, even Southern Europe, have really, really good potential for producing hydrogen. And then when you're looking at blue hydrogen, which is produced from natural gas or coal with carbon capture and storage, we do see that becoming more expensive than green hydrogen in the future, especially as renewable electricity costs come down. But that can be a viable option in places like the US Gulf Coast or Russia, where you've got good geological storage for the carbon, as well as ample natural gas that's quite cheap.
All right, great breakdown. Thank you so much to our Meredith Annex, our Bloomberg NEF hydrogen specialist. And of course, you can get more from the Bloomberg NEF team on the terminal and online. And they've recently done a podcast called Hydrogen 101 as part of its Switched On series. So from iron ore titans pivoting to cleaner energy to talk of a hydrogen revolution, that's it from this week's edition of Bloomberg Green. We'll be back next week with a deep dive into the state of electric vehicles. And you can keep the conversation going by following us on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter @Climate. I'm Kaylee Lyons from Bloomberg's World Headquarters in New York, and this is Bloomberg Green.
news, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We've got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing right now, holding at or near session highs. Investors are weighing the resilience of the American economy against prospects for aggressive policy action to curb inflation. Treasury yields are climbing right now. We do have the 10-year at 2.91%. Oil is falling on demand concerns. West Texas Intermediate down 4.5% right now, 103.37 a barrel. Brent, the global benchmark, 108 even a barrel, down by 4.5%. Equities higher, though, with the S&P up 57, up 1.3%. We've got the Dow up 408 right now, up 1.2%. NASDAQ rallying 241, up by 1.8%. The NASDAQ 100 index up by 1.7%. Russell 2000, though, the outperformer, up now by 2.2%. Bottom line, stocks higher across the board. As for the economic backdrop, specifically the inflation outlook, Victoria Green is founding partner at G Squared Private Wealth.
So yeah, I think right now it is time to play defense. Things are going to slow down. The question I have right now, I kind of consider it the 3 Ps. Is this peak? Is this plateau? Or is this going to be persistent and higher on inflation? And so I think that is one of the biggest questions right now. Which one of those 3 Ps is going to happen?
Johnson & Johnson cutting its annual profit forecast as pharmaceutical sales miss expectations. It's also suspending its guidance for COVID-19 vaccine sales because of unclear demand and global supply surplus. J&J, Johnson & Johnson up 2.9%. Among some of the names scheduled to report after the close of trading today, we will be hearing from Netflix and IBM. Right now, we do have shares of Netflix pushing higher by 2.9%, and IBM, right now, IBM up by 2.1%. Recapping, a rally underway with the S&P up now by 1.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
Very good afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday, April 19, 2022. Carol Masser, Tim Stenovic, live in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. We are streaming on YouTube, and check it out. What happened? I go away for a day and we're going to make a rally. It happened yesterday too, right?
No, the S&P 500 yesterday closed at its lowest level in more than a month.
Oh, okay. Sorry. See,
okay.
I really checked out.
Yeah, I love it. You check out, but that's what you need. You need to rest and relax because when you come back, we see a rally.
Yeah, we do. Yields also up again. Investors seem to be focusing on strength in the economy against aggressive moves by the Fed. We're going to get into that in just a moment. Big earnings day, Netflix and IBM after the close.
Yeah, we're going to bring those to you as soon as they cross. Also, MasterCard is going to tie all employee bonuses to meeting ESG goals. How's that going to work?
I don't know. I brought this up on a conference call with a bunch of CEOs today. Our most read in the past hour, Goldman, speaking of CEO, Goldman CEO leading the firm's flood of cash to that MAGA-fueled Senate run. Remember that cover story, Business Week, just a couple weeks ago.
We're talking Pennsylvania right now. Dr. Oz, David McCormick. It's not going to Oz, by the way.
It's kind of interesting. We've also got the author of a new book. It's called War Without Rule, China's Playbook for Global Domination. It is such a timely topic.
And we'll also get into the 41-minute documentary, Rigged, the Zuckerberg plot to defeat Donald Trump.
Yeah, lots to come. First up, though, let's get to the Market Drivers Report. Let's set that Business Week agenda on this Tuesday. Yelena Shaletyeva, senior U.S. economist at Bloomberg Economics, on the phone from Long Island. Kriti Gupta, markets correspondent at Bloomberg. She's in our Interactive Broker studio. Let's start with you. Risk trade is on, yields are up, and yet it's all okay.
Yeah, what's interesting here is the breadth, and that's really what you want to keep your eye on. I think we're so used to saying higher yields means a higher sell-off when it comes to tech, but today I think the case is really what's going on in the oil market. I think that's where all the action is happening because a lot of the oil moves are coming out of demand concerns. A lot of this coming out from the IMF, cutting their growth forecast, and they're saying it's not just the Russian invasion. The second largest oil consumer in the world is under a lot of pressure as well, and that's China. Yeah, and that's also causing a lot of this. And immediately the reaction should be, sure, we're seeing a lot of commodity costs rise, but what happens when one of your biggest demand sources slows down? And that was really one of the cases the IMF made. But the flip side of that is that
everything else is up.
Exactly. Well, and I think from what I'm seeing, just because there's no other driver here, is that this is really a reaction to the oil market. If you actually run the intraday correlations, literally every tick you see lower on oil seems to be a tick higher for the S&P 500. So that's going to be my best guess, even though you saw comments from James Bullard talking about 75 basis points. And to see Scott Crowley in the face of
Wait
that.
a second. Can you read our minds here?
Come on, Mr. Bullard. Actually, we can hear from him, folks. Listen to this. Oh.
Yeah, more than 50 basis points is not my base case at this point. I would point out that the 1994 cycle, where we raised the policy rate 300 basis points in a year, and in that cycle, there was a 75 basis point increase at one point. So I wouldn't rule it out.
Do I hear 1%?
Should we go back to 1994?
I don't know.
A while ago.
Jim Bullard, president of the St. Louis Fed last night at a Council of Foreign Relations event, obviously talking about an aggressive Fed. Yelena, come on in on what we are hearing. I feel like I am so managed right now by all of the Fed speakers. How do you see it? Because if the Fed can be aggressive, to me, that's a sign of confidence that the economy can take it.
I think it's a sign that, they really need to move as aggressive as possible and as early as possible while, the economy is still doing great. So if they address the inflation problem while the economy can still handle it, that would be better than just waiting until inflation really gets out of hand and the economy slows down. And remember, the economy will slow down just simply because it is coming down from a very aggressive growth pace in the wake of the pandemic. What's interesting to me is not what James Bullard is saying. He's the most hawkish participant of the FOMC.
He's talking his book there, right, Yelena?
He's talking, yes, absolutely. But what really caught my attention today was Charlie Evans' comments. And he says that he expects the Fed will raise rates above neutral. So he's one of the most dovish FOMC members, and he wants to go very aggressively. So that tells you that the Fed was really, has really changed just recently. You can see it in the latest minutes. The staff really changed their view from, the transitory mantra and into a more entrenched inflation dynamics. So I think the Fed is really has changed their view. They will go aggressively. We expect a 50 basis point hike in May. What happens next will depend on where inflation goes. I think we did see a peak in inflation, though.
Okay. Yeah, we've heard that a lot from Bloomberg Economics and other analysts, too. Hey, Kriti, come back in here. Why aren't we seeing a negative reaction from the market in terms of how investors are thinking perhaps about a more hawkish Federal Reserve? It doesn't seem like they're reacting to these comments.
Yeah, well, first off, there's two pieces to this. I don't think consensus at the moment, and big emphasis on at the moment, believes in a 75 basis point rate hike all at once. Also, James Bullard, who is kind of known as often being on the extreme end of the conversation, he said this wasn't his base case. So this is kind of like yes, we could see 75, but we probably won't. And I think that's the way the market is interpreting it.
He's the bull there. I mean, he's the hawk.
But we just had the other comments, too, that Yelena referenced.
Right.
From a dove.
Right, who go above neutral. The way the equity market is trading, Kriti, does that say to you that at least in the short term, it's okay, the markets can take it? It's also a sign that, again, there's economic growth. The IMF, even in reducing its forecast, it didn't say we're going to go into recession globally.
Right, exactly. And I think another piece of the equation is also going to be, put this into context, we've seen a pretty brutal sell-off year to date, which we haven't, I don't think, seen the S&P 500. I'm just going to very quickly check on my handy-dandy Bloomberg terminal. Year to date, we are still down 6.7%. So when you look at the selling pressure like that, we were kind of due for a pullback, for a bounce back anyway. Right. And look at what's leading here is tech all the way, and tech leads the sell-off. Tech also leads you to record. So once again, I feel like this was due, but also keep in mind, some people are still off for the Easter long week extension that I did not get the memo on.
Is volume low?
I can check on my handy Bloomberg terminal, tracking really quickly.
Volume is
low on the 5 day, so that also explains it.
All right, gonna run. Hey guys, thanks so much. Kriti Gupta, she'll be back with her chart of the day. Markets correspondent at Bloomberg, Yelena Shaletyeva, our senior U.S. economist at Bloomberg Economics.
Let's get to Washington, D.C. now for a check of the latest world and national news with Nancy Lyons. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Tim. Russia has ratcheted up its battle for control of Ukraine's eastern industrial heartland. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says it's a new campaign aimed at conquering the Donbass region. He's asking lawmakers there to extend the martial law in Ukraine by another 30 days. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is calling for a 4-day truce to mark Orthodox Holy Week. Well, food insecurity and skyrocketing food prices are front and center among world financial leaders today. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has the story.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen convened a meeting this morning with leaders from the IMF, World Bank, Group of 7, and Group of 20 global organizations, calling on them to deepen their response to countries affected by food issues. Russia and Ukraine produce 14% of the world's wheat supply. The war has caused food prices to spike and created uncertainty about the future of food security. Crisis management specialist Anna Nagurney predicts food insecurity may further isolate Russia. In Washington, I'm Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Independent autopsy results of a black man killed by a Michigan police officer indicates the victim died from a shot to the back of the head. Patrick Leoya was recently stopped by a Grand Rapids police officer, resulting in a confrontation that allegedly ended with the officer firing his gun. Dr. Werner Spitz conducted the autopsy.
The only injury on this body was a typical bullet wound of entrance.
Dr. Werner Spitz says death was instantaneous. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. Nancy Lyons in our D.C. Bureau, Carol Massar, Tim Stenovic here in our Interactive Broker studio. Watching shares of Tesla. They are up about 2% as we speak. And Elon Musk, I think he was out on Twitter again.
Yeah, he's said that he's been on Twitter this whole weekend and throughout yesterday as well. But this one, a New York Post report saying that Elon Musk is willing to invest $10 billion to $15 billion in cash for his Twitter bid. The New York Post cited it 2 sources close to the situation. Carol, yesterday when we talked about the news that Dow Jones broke about Apollo, saying that it would go in on to help Twitter, to help Elon Musk or to help Twitter fend off something. We talked a little bit about how Elon Musk, he may be the wealthiest person in the world, but he doesn't have a ton of cash right now. He's got about $3 billion, according to the Bloomberg Billionaires Index.
I'm cash poor or something?
Well, I don't want to say cash poor because we're still talking $3 billion, but relative to his other assets.
How liquid he is or what?
Yeah, exactly. He's, but you know.
Well, so much of it is in shares,
exactly.
right?
So much of it's in Tesla stock and then also with privately held SpaceX.
So it's interesting. This New York Post story says Musk appears to be having more difficulty than expected in finding backers. May also consider borrowing against his 9.1% stake, which could raise several billion additional dollars. What's interesting, I think it was Surveillance this morning. I can't remember who they were talking to, or was it the interview on Apollo that David Rubenstein did? But I think wasn't it the guy from Apollo who said we could see several parties involved if he ultimately goes through with this deal?
Well, it makes me think of Musk's comments last week from Vancouver when he spoke with Chris Anderson of TED, and he said it's not necessarily about the money. And I'm wondering if that sort of scares away some other investors who might want to see a return on investment. If he's not going to focus on that return, then maybe that dissuades some other folks.
But if you get bought out, what do you care, right? You're private.
But what happens, I mean...
Right?
If you do, yeah, but if you get bought out, but I mean, you still have to put up the money to do that.
Oh, you mean the investors?
Yeah.
Those investors. Oh, those investors.
Yeah, the ones who have to put up the money.
All we know is we keep talking about there's so much money in the private markets. We'll see if they come to his rescue.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. 10-year yield 2.91%. Stocks are extending gains. S&P bouncing back from the lowest close in more than a month. All 11 main industry groups are advancing today, with the exception of energy. West Texas Intermediate crude oil down now by 4.2%, 103.61 a barrel on WTI. Brent 108.26, lower by 4.3%. S&P up right now by 48 points, up 1.1%. The Dow up 349, up 1%. NASDAQ up 202 now, higher by 1.5%. Bottom line here, we are close to session highs. The NASDAQ 100 index up 1.45%, and the Russell 2000 is advancing right now by 2%. Again, that 10-year yield 2.91%. Spot gold down 1.2%, 19.54 the ounce, and Bitcoin rallying by 1.7%. Earnings after the bell today will include Netflix. Netflix right now up by 2.6%. We'll also hear from IBM, up now by 2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. So we've got a couple of election-related stories for you in the next 30 minutes. Let's get to the first one. It is among our most read. I think it is our most read on the Bloomberg in the past 60 minutes, and is related really to a Business Week domestic coverage story that we did about 2 weeks ago about the Senate primary in Pennsylvania, Tim.
Yeah, we're talking about a couple big names there. Dr. Oz is one that many people have heard of, and then David McCormick, who for years was at Bridgewater, the former CEO of the hedge fund. And it turns out that Goldman Sachs executives, well, they're opening up their checkbook. Joining us is Sri Natarajan, finance reporter for Bloomberg News. He's with us in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. Is it all because of who David McCormick is married to?
Well, so let's reveal that to our listeners. David McCormick is married to Dina Powell, who is a Goldman partner and on their management committee. But it is quite interesting when you look at all the disclosures that dropped yesterday. You had something like 65, 70 Goldman partners, many of them, most of them maxing out their contributions to this Senate primary. And you have to look at the big picture. This is a critical Senate primary. Think about landmark bills that the Biden administration might have to pass. Supreme Court justices, all that hangs in the balance in a 50-50 Senate. So the control of that chamber could very well come down to this critical race. That is why it is interesting. But at the same time, you're talking about a race that has taken on a very distinctly MAGA theme. Both the chief contenders there, Dr. Oz on one side, the television minted celebrity, David McCormick, both of them have played to this Trumpian working class agenda, the Make America Great Again, America First, which is a hard ride for someone like Dave McCormick, who had been the CEO of Bridgewater, who had served in the George Bush administration, who is, you would normally look at him and think, an establishment Republican figure who would have plenty of friends all around Wall Street. What you typically not see is someone like McCormick having to take a hard right turn, and then this flock of cash following him into this race. That's why those numbers yesterday were surprising.
Well, Wall Street, we used to, I think, traditionally, historically think of Wall Street as being a friend to Republicans only and donating to those campaigns. We know that's not the case, right? President Obama, he got a lot of money from Wall Street. Is this, Sri, just about Wall Street making sure that they back one of their own because of the issues that will ultimately come before whoever wins this race?
Yeah, the good thing about Wall Street, it doesn't necessarily see red or blue anymore. The Wall Street's closest friend is influence, and if that means spreading money across Democratic races and Republican races, they would do that. 2008 presidential election, when you tallied up the Goldman Sachs numbers, they had given out almost as much as $1 million in that case.
Sri, what's also notable to me about this is it's happening in the primary. It's not happening in the general election, because I'm wondering how much different would a Republican be in that position, whether it's Dr. Oz, whether it is David McCormick, whether it's someone else vying for Toomey's seat who's retiring, versus a Democrat. It would be very different. But how different would the Republicans be from one another? They would still be able to block Biden's agenda.
That is true. So at this point,
why are they betting this early?
Well, at this point, if they had to pick between the two, they've clearly made the choice at Goldman Sachs. Across most of Wall Street, that Dave McCormick is more their guy than a Dr. Oz, because McCormick is a known commodity. They know his ways. They have seen him at professional and personal gatherings, and they would prefer someone like him in that critical seat.
Well, I mean, when you saw these numbers coming in, what surprised you about it? Was it just the magnitude of how many were on board? And I do wonder, does David Solomon go, hey, folks, pony up?
That's the interesting thing. We've talked to a lot of Goldman partners, current and former, who've said that they've gotten relentless emails from senior banking executives at Goldman saying, open up your wallets. You normally don't see this kind of hubbub and excitement for a primary race. This one's already turned out to be the most expensive primary race in the country. And we're talking about fundraising. Also remember that the two prime candidates we're talking about, Dr. Oz and McCormick, are really wealthy individuals who've, I think McCormick's put up $7 million of his own money. Dr. Oz has put up $11 million of his own money. They've made this a pricey race.
Well, and I think about, okay, ultimately though, Shri, is it about, and we've talked about this from a political standpoint with our Josh Green. I mean, is it all about though, ultimately, who Donald Trump kind of says you're the chosen one? Or is Donald Trump also watching who raises the most money? And I know that gets into the political world. But
as weird as it sounds, a lot of the races this year are also a litmus test for the former president, for Donald Trump. He has gone in this case, Dr. Oz, McCormick, both were vying for his endorsement. McCormick didn't get it. Dr. Oz did get it. Side note from that fabulous Business Week story, we were told that Melania is a big fan of Dr. Oz. But the question is, he might be the most popular, he probably is the most popular Republican figure in the country. How much does his endorsement matter? He's gone in and he's tried to figure out who's still out there, who's willing to say that the 2020 election was stolen. You say that, you're more than likely to get the Trump endorsement. He's made a variety of decisions. In fact, this was one race where Donald Trump had made an endorsement. The candidate dropped out because of domestic violence allegations, I believe. And then we have this new set of candidates, and Trump has again made an endorsement. So in the primary next month, will it be his candidate who wins? Because it will give you a window into his stranglehold on the party.
And it's interesting to see if McCormick pivots a little bit because he didn't get the endorsement. Does he... You know, because that whole story was like, who is the real David McCormick?
And he sort of refused to come out and say specifically that the election was stolen.
Right. Just quickly.
Yes, but I think the real pivot, if you were to see one, would probably start May 18. May 17 is the primary race.
All right, so we'll watch the clock. Shri, so good to have you here. As we said, I said it was the most read in the past 60 minutes. It's actually the most read in the past 8 hours on the Bloomberg.
Congrats, Shri. That's awesome. Shri Natarajan, finance reporter for Bloomberg News, with us in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Check out his story. Goldman CEO leads firm's flood of cash to MAGA-fueled Senate run.
Coming up, we're talking Facebook and elections. That's next.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week on this Tuesday. It's a tricky Tuesday, to say the least.
It is a tricky. Everything after like an extended weekend or a long period of time off.
Or if they shift your seat in the control
things get a little wacky.
In the studio, we all just get thrown off.
If you're watching on YouTube, you'll notice a new view behind me.
Tim is next to me. You wouldn't know that, but he actually is next to me. There's my hand. Okay, there we go.
Okay. Thanks, Ari.
All right, coming up, we're going to talk about Facebook and elections. There's a new documentary out. We're going to get into it with our own Max Chaffkin.
You heard of Zuckbucks? That's what we're talking about after this. First, though, a check of the trading day. Here's Charlie Pellet.
Thank you very much. And here's what's going on. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing right now, holding close to session highs. Stocks are extending gains today as investors weigh the resilience of the American economy against prospects for aggressive policy action to curb inflation. Could that be 75 basis points? Treasury yields are climbing. Oil is falling on demand concerns. Right now, we've got the 10-year yield at 2.91%. The 10-year down 17.30 seconds. Spot gold tumbling 1.2%. 19.54 the ounce. Bitcoin up 1.9%, 41,449 on Bitcoin. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. S&P right now up 51, a gain of 1.2%. The Dow up 372, up 1.1%. NASDAQ up 214, up by 1.6%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is tumbling 4.9% right now, 102.91 a barrel. Brent, the global benchmark, down 5%, 107.54 a barrel. Tesla has revealed that it is facing an investigation by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that predates a lawsuit by California's civil rights agency accusing the company of ignoring rampant racism on its factory assembly line. Tesla will report earnings tomorrow after the closing bell. Tesla shares up now by 1.7%. Most major American airlines are no longer requiring travelers or employees to wear face coverings on domestic and some international flights. Dr. Amish Adalja is senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. And on Bloomberg Television and Radio this morning, he was asked if we're making a switch to a seasonal virus.
I think it's shocking because people haven't really transitioned to that in their thinking that COVID-19 is becoming like other respiratory viruses, but that's what it's going to do. It's going to join the other members of its family and be something that always has a baseline number of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths, probably accelerates when it gets colder, decreases during the summer, and becomes something that we can treat with vaccines, monoclonal antibodies, antivirals. So I think that foretells what was always going to be the case, and I think we're there.
Dr. Adalja with the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, which is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Pfizer shares down now by 4%. Its German partner BioNTech, its ADR is down 0.6%. AstraZeneca down 1.2%. Moderna lower by 3.2%. Johnson & Johnson, after earnings this morning, J&J up now by 3.1%. Recapping, S&P right now higher by 50, up 1.1%. 10-year yield 2.91%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, got it, Charlie. Thank you so much. As we mentioned, we're covering elections from a few different angles. We just talked with our Sri Natarajan about what Goldman's up to in terms of supporting that primary race, Senate primary race in Pennsylvania. Our second story, Tim, tackles how fake election claims could be a real problem for Facebook, and it digs into a 41-minute documentary called Rigged.
Yeah, it promotes a conspiracy theory about that election, and it could bedevil Meta's Washington strategy. So writes Max Chaffkin, features editor at Bloomberg Business Week. He joins us on the phone from Queens. Max, I just want to start with Rigged. I actually, before reading this, I didn't know what Zuckbucks were, and so for people who aren't familiar with Zuckbucks, what does it refer to?
Yeah, so if you've been sort of following conservative media or paying attention to sort of what's been going on in state legislatures, you'll have heard this term. It refers to a donation or a series of donations made by Mark Zuckerberg, the founder and CEO of Facebook, which is now called Meta, and his wife Priscilla Chan, to local election boards during the 2020 campaign. The idea behind these donations, at least as Zuckerberg and Chan explained them at the time, was that local election boards were dealing with the pandemic. They needed extra PPE. They were dealing with, vote by mail and so on, and that this was a way to sort of help, allow the election to go off without a hitch. Now, retrospectively, on the right, and that's where this documentary comes in, and this has been a big trope in conservative media. We have people saying that these donations were actually partisan, and what the documentary that you bring up alleges, or kind of implies without coming out and saying it, is that this was somehow, the fact that these donations proves Donald Trump's claim that the 2020 election was rigged. Now, that's false, and again, there's not a lot of evidence to suggest that these donations were even partisan. There is evidence, of course, to suggest that Mark Zuckerberg has, partisan political leanings and so on. But what's happening here is you have this kind of right-wing, media thing, which will play out and it'll have an impact, on the 2022 election, possibly in 2024. But it also has an impact on Facebook, and that's kind of what I was looking at, because you have, these very loud and increasingly loud claims about Facebook, and that's harming this company's position, as a business.
Well, and the film actually, I didn't realize, premiered at Mar-a-Lago, which is kind of interesting in its own right. I mean, I do think we're talking so much about the upcoming elections that could be very significant in terms of, obviously, the outcome and who is going to have more sway going forward. Why do you think or what do you think the implications are of this, or the potential implications?
Well, I think from a political standpoint, it's probably not all that significant. It helps forward this theory. This theory is, as we kind of know, going to be a big part of our politics for the next couple of years, for better or worse. And we're going to have a big fight in 2022 and probably in 2024 over these sort of imagined failings. And that's I think bad, of course, for American democracy. But the kind of unfortunate thing for a company is when you find yourself in the middle of this, right? Mm-hmm. Where Facebook has, as I wrote in this piece, gone really out of its way to try to cultivate, members of both sides of the political spectrum. Mark Zuckerberg met with Donald Trump repeatedly during the Trump presidency, and was criticized by the left all the time for being, as the left saw it, too close to Trump, and all that has basically amounted to nothing. And we're seeing Facebook, get caught up in this kind of conspiracy theory, and I think is sort of becoming, if you're paying attention to sort of right-wing media, is becoming almost like an integral part of this conspiracy theory. And, that's going to hurt this gigantic social network, which is really dependent on, not just not being a political actor, or being seen as kind of equal on either side.
Yeah.
At a time when, regulators certainly want to go after it. Democrats and Republicans want to go after it for different reasons.
All right, Max, good to check in with you. Max Chafkin, he's our features editor at Bloomberg Business Week, on the phone from Queens, New York.
Well, let's go from Queens to Washington, D.C. for a check the latest world and national news with Nancy Lyons. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Tim. Most major airlines and Uber and Lyft are telling passengers it is okay to take their masks off. A federal judge in Florida has struck down the federal mask mandate for public transit. The TSA says it is no longer enforcing it, but the CDC is still recommending it, and Amish Adalja with the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security says that's okay.
Remember that one-way masking works. You can get access to an N95 or an N95 equivalent and wear one of those masks if you're in one of those high-risk situations. Just because the government doesn't require it doesn't mean you can't do it, or doesn't mean that the airlines themselves can't require it.
Amish Adalja at Johns Hopkins. The White House says it is considering its legal options. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson today apologized to the House of Commons for breaking the UK's lockdown rules that he ordered. He paid a fine for attending an event at Downing Street on his birthday in June of 2020, and he could face even more fines. Members of Parliament will be voting on the Commons on Thursday on whether to refer Johnson to the Committee on Standards for misleading Parliament. This morning, President Biden spoke with our allies to discuss what more can be done to support Ukraine, with Russia now launching a new phase of the war in eastern Ukraine. Bloomberg's Mark Champion says the terrain there is different, so the wish list from Ukraine is long.
They need to be able to defend themselves against air attack. They need long-range artillery in order to be able to take out the artillery that's shooting at them. They need tanks. They need mobility. And all of this needs to come very quickly across a long distance that the Russians are now also targeting.
Again, Bloomberg's Mark Champion. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. Nancy Lyons in our D.C. newsroom. We were mentioning some of the most read stories on the Bloomberg. This is one of them. This has to do with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. He escalated a dispute with the Walt Disney Company by asking the state's legislature to consider the termination of special privileges that the company currently enjoys in its state.
A lot of news coming out of Florida in recent days, Carol.
Anything going on?
Yeah, mask
state
mandate
politically.
too. Yeah. Well, the legislature, which is meeting in a special session to debate congressional redistricting maps, quote, will be considering termination of all special districts that were enacted in Florida prior to 1968, and that includes the Reedy Creek Improvement District, DeSantis said on Thursday. Reedy Creek was created in 1967 by a special act of the legislature to allow Disney to carry out certain municipal functions on its own.
This is just, okay, showing kind of the environment we are, certainly politically. And there are a lot of, I was mentioning this call, you and I are headed to Milken in a few weeks, the Global Institute back, and we're both doing some panels and having conversations with CEOs. And these are the kinds of issues that are coming up in terms of being a leader in this environment. And there's a lot of political issues that are out there, and you might be getting pressure from political officials in a state, you might be getting pressure from your employees or your customers, and all of those pressures may be at odds with one another.
Look, it puts executives in a really tricky position because they need to make sure that they're, well, you know, they're in these areas for a certain reason, and oftentimes there are favorable tax treatments or incentives that have been put in place years ago, or in this case, it goes back generations. But at the same time, you don't want to alienate your customers and the people who work for you.
And there could be certainly a financial impact, and this is why we certainly care for our audience. Michael Rinaldi, he's head of U.S. local government ratings at Fitch, in an emailed statement saying it would eliminate the company's access to cheaper tax-exempt financing through the special district, potentially costing Disney and other landowners within the district more to finance various projects. But it's typical, right? You come into our state, you get these breaks, we help you develop because that brings jobs, helps our economy. But this is a political fight.
Disney shares, though, higher on the day.
Yeah, well, stay tuned and we'll see what happens. All right, you're listening to Bloomberg Business Week, and this is Bloomberg Radio.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Treasury yields are climbing. Oil is falling on demand concerns, and the S&P 500 bouncing back from the lowest close in more than a month. Right now, the S&P 500 index higher by 55 points, up 1.3%. The Dow's advancing 391, up 1.1%. NASDAQ up 229, up by 1.7%. The 10-year yield, 2.91%. Spot gold tumbling 1.3%. Down $25 the ounce now to $19.54. Crude down 5.3%, 102.50 for a barrel of WTI. We do have a Brent crude at 107.17, lower now by 5.3%. The Russell 2000 up by 2% right now. And after earnings, Johnson & Johnson shares, they are advancing today. J&J, after earnings again, up now by just about 3.2%. Stocks higher, S&P up 1.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, gotcha, Charlie. Thank you so much. Now, as we mentioned, we're covering elections from a few different angles. We just talked to Max Chafkin about Facebook. Our second story tackles how... Excuse me.
We were talking about social media.
It's a Tuesday brain.
I was thinking to myself, how is Carol going to connect this to politics?
Well, there is no. We did those two stories. We're going to talk about actually a story that's online from Bloomberg Business Week.
Let's now bring in Joel Weber and Bob Langreth. Joel Weber's editor at Bloomberg Business Week. He's with us in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Bob Langreth is healthcare reporter for Bloomberg News. He's with us on the phone from New York City. This is a deep dive into Alzheimer's trials, excluding black patients at a, quote, astonishing rate. Joel, black people are more prone than white people to develop Alzheimer's, yet they represent only 2% of those in clinical trials. Why?
Jarring, right? And part of what makes this, I think, really interesting is that Alzheimer's has been a space that has had no solutions, anything resembling a solution from drug companies. And last year, that started to break through because of Biogen, with a drug called Aduhelm, which I'm pretty sure I butchered that, and Bob Langreth is going to tell me how to actually say it. Which meant that there were actually more studies being done, and yet when we actually dove into that data, it revealed that there was a dearth of black participation. So Bob, what's going on here?
Yeah, so what's really interesting about this, and by the way, it's if anyone cares, it's Aduhelm, I think is how you pronounce it. You have to ask the company. This is the first new Alzheimer's drug in 18 years, but it's very, very controversial over its efficacy, and Medicare recently said they would not cover it outside of clinical trials because of the controversy over the efficacy. And one of the things that, the broader things we're finding out is as, drug companies have had trouble making drugs for Alzheimer's disease with lots of failures and are, very murky, conflicting results. And one of the things we're finding out, and this is an example of that from broader perspectives, that they've only been testing the drugs in this very, very narrow slice of patients, which have tended to be essentially more, affluent, whiter people that have access to sort of a handful of top medical centers that can make these early diagnoses, because that's the people they are looking for. And when we did a data analysis in particular, which we think is one of the largest that's ever been done, even though black Americans have are up to twice as likely to get Alzheimer's as white Americans, they only made up about 2% of people in trials of the drugs. You don't even know, what it's going to do in some of the very populations that are more likely to get it. And the other thing that's important that's going on is because of all the exclusions and all the trials, exclusion criteria, they're actually excluding a larger number of people with other pre-existing conditions. And so it's just not, they're not really testing on a representative population of patients, because Alzheimer's affects very old people and people with lots of pre-existing conditions. They're not even being tested on that. So it's a real problem that needs to be solved.
So scientists, as you write and report, Bob, are aware of this problem, and yet nobody seems to be, certainly the drug companies don't seem to be fixing it or changing how they do this. Why?
Well, yeah, drug companies say they're working on it and they say they've gotten the message, but, some of the researchers we talked to are skeptical, and that it needs to be more than just targets. It needs to be kind of fundamental change, kind of in the way the trials are done. And one of the researchers we talked to from Massachusetts General Hospital said basically if you aren't, basically people, a lot of, if you're not in a kind of, the trials essentially basically are very elitist. The way the trial's been conducted. If you're not in one of the kind of elite few, which is typically more wealthy and more white, you're not even not only going to not be offered a trial, you're not even going to be diagnosed in time to get a trial because these trials are the only chance you have of probably affecting Alzheimer's is if you get it very early when the neurons, the brain cells haven't died yet.
Yeah, Bob, hey, can you talk a little more about what's at stake here? And I think it's hard to find an American whose life hasn't been touched in some way by Alzheimer's, certainly pervasive in many families, and just an excruciating illness for those who have had loved ones who've experienced it. Talk about what's at stake here in terms of treatment.
Yeah, so I think it's about 6 million people with Alzheimer's in the country. There've been very few, have been no treatments. There's no treatment proven to slow the course of the disease. Biogen thought it, had one, but its trials were contradictory. The drug was approved at home anyway, but there's just so much controversy about these drugs, and it's really important to get drugs that show some clear effects, but also to prove that they're safe, and that means you need to test the drugs in older people which have pre-existing conditions, because that's who gets Alzheimer's. There's very few people, there's only a small number of people who get Alzheimer's that don't have other pre-existing conditions, which include vascular disease, many strokes, diabetes that can affect the vasculature of the brain. So it's very important to test these drugs, which have potentially, lots of side effects and are very intrusive. You have to go into an infusion center for some of them. It's very important to test them in a broad range of people because you want a drug not only that works, but it's safe in the actual people that are going to use it. So this is, critical importance to do this testing right, because these tests take years, and if you mess it up or it's not representative, it sets us back for years.
Part of what's even more upsetting about the story, Bob, is that the data that you all crunched looked at not only Alzheimer's, but other neurodegenerative disorders as well, right? So it's not like it just singled out people who are afflicted by Alzheimer's. It actually seems to be a bigger problem than that. That speaks to this problem that the drug industry as a whole has, right?
Yeah. So the clinical trials as a whole, in general, of drugs have been skewed more towards not including Black people or representative numbers of Black people or Hispanic people or other minorities. And that's been true in general, but appears to be particularly true for some of these neurodegenerative disorders that are hard to diagnose. You need to go to a specialty center. You need, sometimes a diagnosis is very subtle. And that basically means you don't have good insurance and don't have access to these elite medical centers. You don't get diagnosis or get to the few people that are kind of doing pioneering treatment. So we saw disparities in the trials of Alzheimer's, of Parkinson's, of ALS, of spinal muscular atrophy. That was really, significant. We have a history, like just even back to Tuskegee medical experiments, of distrust in the system. That's, of course, where poor Black males with syphilis were left untreated for years. So there's a history of this country. So it's really important as this whole new frontier that's opening up of potential treatments for some of the most devastating brain disorders, that we get this right this time.
Well, and you get into also maybe the role of what government can do to maybe change this. Hey, it's a great story. Bob, thank you so much. Bob Langreth, healthcare reporter at Bloomberg News, on the phone in New York City. You can find his story online at Bloomberg.com, businessweek.com. You can also find it, of course, on the Bloomberg terminal. Our thanks also to Jill Weber, editor of Bloomberg Business Week. He's here in our Interactive Brokers studio. I do think about the history, though, Jill, right, of minority communities and
yeah, and I mean, you think even about the reluctance around COVID,
exactly,
and vaccines there, and it's just like, have we learned nothing?
All right, you are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master, Tim Stanovic, and this is Bloomberg Radio.
Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage ahead of the U.S. market close starts right now.
This is the countdown to the close. 60 minutes left here in the trading session. Romaine Bostic, Taylor Rich, and Ollie Bassick in for Caroline Hyde today. We're joined right now by our colleagues, Tim Stenovic, Carol Masser, making an appearance for a shortened 4-day work week for her. We welcome in our audiences across Bloomberg Television, radio, and of course on YouTube. And Carol, we had a rally yesterday, and that completely kind of fizzled out by the time we got to the close. This one today looks like it has a little bit more staying power.
By the way, I missed you too, Romaine, yesterday being off. Tech leading the rally today, but I'm really watching those home builder stocks up another 4% in today's trade. We got a really strong housing starts number. I think it was the fastest pace since 06. You had Blackstone really doubling down into its housing bet. So you are definitely seeing those stocks outperforming here, Tim.
Yeah, speaking of outperformance, I'm again watching airlines. We sort of had this delayed reaction to the judge on Monday overruling that federal mandate. A lot of airlines came out late yesterday and said you no longer have to wear a mask on airplanes. All 5 airlines in the S&P 500
are you guys not going to wear a mask?
Well, I'm a little puzzled by
this.
I'm puzzled by this. I'll admit it.
Just going to say.
Well,
What's to be puzzled by?
I'm
puzzled by investor reactions.
Yeah, because is that why it's? I mean, just suddenly people run out and start buying more airline tickets. They were doing pretty well before this.
Was being required to wear a mask for 2 or 3 hours on an airplane, or maybe when you were in the airport as well, was that preventing people from buying tickets to go somewhere?
12 hours, maybe.
I've had flights rerouted because people wouldn't wear the mask on a plane twice. Actually,
look, we know it's welcome news. We know it's welcome news for airline executives and for a lot of flight attendants who perhaps didn't want to wear them. But at the same time, I just don't see how this changes the way that people think about airlines.
But more indicative of the world coming back from the pandemic, maybe?
Yeah.
Perhaps?
Well said, Carol. At least you see that exuberance today within the major equity markets as well. You're still looking at near session highs, certainly session highs on the S&P 500. Technology, which was sort of a big underperformer yesterday, tries to do a big rebound here today. And NASDAQ still holding on, trying to hold on to the highs of the sessions as well. And a Russell 2000, big outperformer, 2%. Maybe this speaks, Shanali, to some of that domestic excitement, domestic exuberance that really comes through on some of this reflationary trade that's currently underway.
Yeah, let's talk about that reflationary trade, because if you look in the sectors of the S&P 500, you're seeing that rise more than 2.5% in consumer discretionary. Real estate led higher, 1.9%. You know, that big Blackstone bet we were talking about. Energy, the favorite trade of the year, is actually down a little bit on the day, but most major sectors are in the green.
Yeah, you talk about some of the individual movers. I want to start with one of the big decliners today. Halliburton, the shares are all over the map today. They were down about 2%, then they were higher by about 2%. Now, roughly down about 0.3%. They came out with the earnings, and this was really about cost. The cost to drill, and the idea that those costs are just going through the roof, as we've heard for pretty much every other industry here. So whatever benefit that company might be seeing, of course, from higher oil prices and the higher activity in the shale space, some of that, of course, being eaten up by the higher costs. The company saying that drilling budget's up by about 35% here. The idea of sticker shock really could potentially be a drag here. Meanwhile, Johnson & Johnson shares higher by about 3%. They actually came out with earnings this morning. They said that basically they're going to stop getting guidance on their COVID-19 vaccine. That vaccine revenue was around $457 million in the quarter, about $300 million shy of what the street was looking for. But they made up for it in some of their other businesses, including in their medical device businesses. That appears to be where some of the enthusiasm is. Cassava Sciences shares down about 13%. You remember last year, that company came out with a pretty interesting study that showed at least what a lot of people thought was pretty good progress on making an Alzheimer's drug, but a bombshell story in the New York Times today casting doubt on some of those studies. That follows an investigation that was launched a few months ago by U.S. authorities. And at the top of your screen there, we're keeping an eye on Netflix. So shares higher by about 3%. We're going to get those earnings after the bell. I think I could call that a bellwether, certainly for a lot of the tech stocks and certainly for the streaming media companies.
I think deep down I want to rip up the script and just do balance sheet write-downs when you talk about Halliburton, Romaine, and the full write-down of some of those Ukrainian assets, but we won't go into balance sheet write-down analysis. Instead, we will go back to Netflix. As Romaine said, sort of a big bellwether here. And I want to be careful here because I'm looking at a forward PE of the consumer discretionary. Now, we of course know that Netflix in that? No, Romaine, I said give me a minute to explain.
Go ahead.
Of course, Netflix is not in the discretionary index, but big picture, if you think about if you're facing inflation, where do you want to pull back on your budget? Where do you want to cut back, as Tim earlier cut back on his big football show show in the middle of football season. Is Netflix going to be one of them, right?
Is that a scripted show?
We just were able to.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you're taking a look at the forward PEs of some of these discretionary stocks, and they are a little bit lower as real wages are also lower.
All right, I didn't want to interrupt you, Taylor, but I will explain that we did recently find out we were still paying for Paramount Plus many months after the football season ended. And
Thank you, Tim.
I got some
I
flack
see. I
for
knew
that
that
last
people in
week.
California would understand what you and I were thinking about.
Thank you.
All right, this is certainly all important, what Tim's doing in terms of his streaming services and paying or not paying for. In the meantime, we definitely have seen in the trade today, investors seemingly focusing more on growth and not so concerned about aggressive maybe Fed moves. We did hear from the IMF chief economist, Pierre-Olivier Gorincha, who talked about what the IMF did in terms of reducing global growth forecasts. Here's what he had to say.
Compared to our January forecast, we have revised our projection for global growth downwards to 3.6% in both 2022 and 2023. This reflects the direct impact of the war on Ukraine and sanctions on Russia, with both countries projected to experience steep contractions.
All right, so the IMF chief economist there, reducing global growth forecast. The only thing I would say, guys, is at least there's still growth going forward. We're not talking about reducing it down to recessionary levels, Tim.
Yeah, but there still are a lot of unknowns here, right? We don't know what's going to happen with the war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We don't know what's going to happen in China with the lockdown of Shanghai and associated supply chain issues there, or perhaps flare-ups of the pandemic in other parts of the world. So, you know, projections like these, they're tough to make.
Yeah, and I mean, I should point it out too. I mean, it is important that you said that growth here, and they're not really projecting any sort of real contraction in any sort of the major economies. But this has now become a topic of discussion: is how does Europe avoid recession? How does Europe avoid stagflation, if not recession? How does China sort of avoid a more severe downturn here? And then, of course, it brings us back to the U.S. I mean, everything looks great now, but can the Fed navigate this path?
And how much room do you have for things to look bad for investors? Remember, a lot of these recessionary outlooks in the U.S. are not this year. But to your point, Romaine, if the euro area falls into recession a little bit earlier, how does it drag down other areas as well?
Shonali done some great work earlier for our radio audience as well, highlighting some of the spreads, maybe some little bit of the cracks. I was reading some analysis that maybe the triple C's are where people are starting to avoid. Overall, though, you know, Carol, I would say that the investment grade and the high yield in terms of spread over Treasury, very, very stable. So hard if that's a leading indicator to see where there are cracks at all in the fundamentals.
And this seems to be the narrative we've heard from a lot of strategists and economists that we bring on the show here, is that when you really do look at the economic fundamentals and the earnings fundamentals that we're starting to get this season here, there's a lot to be encouraged by, despite the fact that the baseline for growth is going to be lower.
Well, and basically we've got to keep a watch on tightening monetary conditions and tightening financial conditions overall. That's when we start to see banks and consumers ultimately pulling back. So that's also key in terms of determining growth going forward. All right, guys, we've got lots more to talk about. We'll do it in less than an hour's time. We'll be back. Our cross-platform coverage on radio, TV, and YouTube. Beyond the Bell, we're going to count you down to the close on this Tuesday.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, you are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. We're going to catch up once again with Shonali, Romaine, and Taylor. We will count you down. We've got Netflix earnings after the close, IBM earnings. I think it was important what you said about China, though, in terms of growth. Like, we've got to keep a watch on what's going on in the second largest economy, global economy, and how the differences between growth in maybe some parts of the world, but maybe contraction in other parts of the world, and differing monetary policy, what that means for investors.
There have been some really interesting maps being shared on Twitter lately about the number of ships that are awaiting to unload in parts of China as a result of different lockdowns, because we think about that in the context of supply chain snarls. And when you do have a zero COVID policy, one case or a handful of cases, at least in the way that we think about cases here in the U.S. and in many parts of the world, that can just wreak havoc in China.
It's interesting that you brought that up. There was a story on the Bloomberg bar, Debbie Wu, the world's biggest iPhone assembly campus on the outskirts of the central Chinese city of Zhengzhou is operating normally despite lockdowns and mass COVID-19 testing in the area that began last week. This is according to an official newspaper report there. But so is that Apple and its leverage?
And
so,
Tesla's having people stay at the plant.
right? So some of them are figuring it out, or I don't know. Like, it's interesting, but you're right. Like, we have to watch that because we certainly saw it with the ports here in the U.S. All right, you're listening. What?
I was going to say it's not business as usual, but it's starting to seem like it's business as usual.
Masks are off here.
Yeah.
Business as usual?
Not yet.
All right. Let's get to World and National News. Over to Nancy Lyons in our D.C. newsroom. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Carol. Russia is ramping up its attacks in eastern Ukraine, especially in the Donbass region. Bloomberg's Mark Champion explains what's likely to come next from Russian troops.
There's a defined goal that the Russians have for now. And that is to take these two regions, Donetsk and Luhansk, in their entirety. They've had about a third of it since 2014. And they've taken, more of it, more than half in total now since this war began, this new offensive in February. And they're now trying to take the rest.
Again, Bloomberg's Mark Champion reporting. The International Monetary Fund is cutting its forecast for world economic growth this year to 3.6%, almost half of what it was last year.
The reason for the slowdown is painfully obvious, IMF chief economist Pierre-Olivier Gourinshaw suggested in a Bloomberg interview.
The dominant factor is the war. So when we think about the downside risk to the global economy, an escalation of the war or a tightening of the sanctions, in particular an extension of the sanctions to energy exports from Russia, would have a significant impact on global output and on output in neighboring countries, in particular in Europe.
The IMF also cited the risk of further slowdown in China because of both the pandemic and reduced world demand for its products. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
President Biden is in New Hampshire this afternoon to talk about ports and supply chain bottlenecks. He's visiting the New Hampshire Port Authority at Portsmouth Harbor. The White House says the port will receive funding from the big infrastructure bill to accommodate larger ships. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. Carol Massar, Tim Stenovic, and we thought things were bad in New York.
Yeah, well, they could be getting worse, especially for the 3,000 buildings here in the city that are bracing for a potential strike of doormen and other apartment workers. Our building would not be affected.
Okay, not a doorman building?
Not a unionized doorman building.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, yeah, that is an interesting twist.
I didn't think about that. What's the difference?
These are the ones that are unionized. This is a story by Jennifer Epstein and Jill Shaw, just crossed, but already getting a read spike, meaning that a lot of people are looking at it right now. More than 3,000 New York City buildings are bracing for a potential strike of doormen and other apartment workers. Anxieties are high as negotiations enter the final hours.
Yeah, we're talking about buildings from Park Avenue co-ops to Tribeca condos, Long Island City rentals also. In all, housing about 550,000 New Yorkers. Residents are getting ready for disruptions to virtually every element of how their buildings operate, including trash collection, deliveries, cleaning, and also non-emergency repairs. And they've been asked to volunteer for shifts, checking identification of anyone who tries to enter the property and hauling garbage bags to the street.
I think it's worth explaining.
People need to understand how we live.
Exactly. I was just going to say.
To be fair.
It's worth explaining how things work in many parts of New York City and in doorman buildings. Oftentimes they're high rises with many thousands of people who live there. Right. And if you can imagine, that's a lot of trash each and every day that the residents make. So that stuff is handled by porters and apartment workers and doormen. Deliveries, so all those packages that people order from Amazon are cataloged. Security is a huge portion of that as well. So interesting to see this note about residents actually volunteering for shifts.
Now, I will say this story reminds us that the most recent strike back in 1991 lasted about 12 days, causing inconveniences for residents and leaving the workers unpaid. Since then, the threat of a walkout has loomed every few years, only to be resolved at the last minute. It's a movie we've seen before.
It has. Residents don't want to lose the conveniences that come with living in full-service towers, but are sympathetic to the workers' cause, according to people our reporters spoke to.
Right, and people who live there often pay more for those services, big time. Anyway, getting a read spike here on the Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.